Hi guys. Tonight we ease into a winter, so cold that your breath turns white the moment it leaves your mouth. You stand at the edge of a medieval English village, and the air already pinches your cheeks with a sharpness that only deep winter can manage. Frost thickens on every thatched roof. Icicles cling to timber frames like tiny glass knives. Snow packs hard under your boots as you trudge forward, and you feel the stillness of a world where the sun slips away early and gives almost nothing back. For a moment you imagine sleeping here through a night that drops below -20 Fahrenheit. You probably will not survive this. Not without a few tricks. Not without learning how these villagers did it long before anything like central heating existed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you want, you can also tell me where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights and feel yourself stepping deeper into the scene as the cold rises up around your ankles and your breath curls like pale smoke. You move farther into the village, and everything feels slow, careful, deliberate. The air is so crisp that every whisper seems louder, and the faint smell of wood smoke drifts between crooked cottages. You hear a low creak as a door shifts in the wind. Someone inside is checking how much firewood is left for the night. You sense the worry in that gesture because firewood has always been expensive in winter. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Medieval England faced heavy deforestation in several regions by the late Middle Ages, which made fuel scarce and valuable. That scarcity shapes this entire night. It shapes the way every family prepares for sleep, and it shapes the way you breathe as you step closer to the nearest doorway. You pause at the threshold of a small peasant cottage. A tiny window glows from within. The shutters rattle a little in the harsh wind. You slip inside, and the warmth from the room feels weak but comforting. A smoky fire smoulders in the hearth. The villagers are finishing their evening tasks. They eat something thick and hot, maybe pottage made from whatever root vegetables they managed to store before the first freeze. You can smell the earthy steam rising from the pot. You stand quietly and watch how careful everyone is with their movements. They are trying not to let too much heat escape. The moment they open the door, cold floods in like a living creature. As you look around, another detail catches your attention. A small bundle rests near the hearth. It looks like a lump of twigs, cloth, and something odd. When you crouch down for a better look, you realize it is a quirky warming charm. Some families tucked odd items, such as dried frog skins or carved wooden tokens, into pockets or bedding for luck against winter chills. That strangeness feels both whimsical and desperate. People took comfort wherever they could find it, even if that comfort came from a superstition that lasted only through long nights. The family begins settling for bed. They move slowly. You watch them bank the fire, meaning they pull ashes forward to smother the flame but protect the hidden coals. Banking the fire allows the embers to survive until morning, and you see how they press the ashes carefully with a wooden tool. There is a quiet tension to it. Everyone knows that if the coals die overnight, the cold will punish them for it. Historians still argue whether rural households used particular tools or just bare hands with rags to bank the fire. But the exact method remains uncertain because written records are limited. You lean in and feel the faint warmth that will soon become even weaker as midnight settles in. You shift your attention to the cottage walls. They are made with wattle and daub, a mix of mud, clay, straw, and small stones. The surface looks uneven, and the wooden beams creak softly with each gust of wind. You run your gloved fingers along the wall and feel the tiny vibrations. It is not much of a barrier against cold, and you know it. The people living here know it too. They have stuffed gaps with moss and scraps of cloth in hopes of slowing the icy drafts. In your modern life, you might worry about efficiency ratings or insulation codes. Here, everything is survival. Every rushed repair or rough patch of clay could be the difference between a tolerable night and frozen fingers. Your breath fogs as you inhale the smoky air. You notice a faint scent of rotting rushes from the floor. mixed with the smell of wool and unwashed clothes. The sensory blend, strange as it is, brings a sense of closeness. These families depended on each other and their environment in ways you rarely imagine. The cold does that. It presses everyone into the same space. It turns rooms into ecosystems filled with whispers, sniffles, and the gentle shifting of tired bodies. One of the villagers glances at you with a knowing look. You get the sense that strangers stand out in winter because nothing moves freely during this season. People stay indoors when they can. Animals huddle in barns. The village paths are empty except for a stray dog or someone fetching water from a frozen stream. You understand how isolation becomes part of the nightly rhythm. Winter sleep is not just a biological need, it is a strategy. As you ease into the corner of the room, you allow the warm weight of your clothing to press against your shoulders. Thick wool scrapes your skin. You shift in place and feel the coarse texture catching on your sleeves. It is not comfortable by modern standards, but it works. It holds in heat, traps body warmth, and promises some measure of safety. You close your eyes for a moment. You imagine how villagers layered linen, wool, and sometimes fur. You hear the faint crackle of the fire as a coal breaks apart. A spark flares and dies. Your mind drifts to another thought. The cold changes sound. It sharpens it. Every small noise becomes distinct. The roof timbers pop as frost expands them. A faint whistle slips through a tiny gap in the window frame. Someone coughs softly. A baby fusses for a moment before falling quiet again. You listen to these sounds as though they are part of a lullaby made for difficult nights. Each sound reminds you that this cottage is alive, that warmth is a fragile but shared effort. You take one final long breath. The air is heavy, smoky, and warm in the way that only a small fire in a tightly packed room can be. You sense that the night ahead will teach you more. It will show you how people adapted to cold that would send most modern sleepers running for heated blankets. You feel your body growing quieter as you wait for the next part of the journey. You stay in the peasant cottage only a little longer, before slipping back outside into the cutting dark. The moment you step through the door, the cold clamps onto you like a living hand. It takes your breath for a second. Snow crunches under your boots as you move toward the next cottage, and the night sky feels endless above you. Stars glint like sharp bits of ice. Your eyelashes stiffen with frost as you blink. You push forward because you want to understand how people managed to sleep when there was no heating at all, only a flickering fire that threatened to die before dawn. You follow a narrow footpath that winds between cottages. Every house glows faintly through wooden shutters. These shutters are thin and loose, and you wonder how anyone sleeps with winter scraping at the walls. The truth is that they adapted by using darkness itself as insulation. When night fell, people shut everything tight, covered shutters with cloth, and relied on the thickness of the dark to slow the draft. You picture yourself inside one of these homes at the moment just before sleep. The fire is low. The air is smoky. The room is filled with the quiet patience that winter requires. When you slip into the next cottage, the scene is similar but not identical. Here, the hearth is already dying. A few embers glow like small rubies. A woman kneels beside the hearth with a long iron poker, carefully pushing ash around the embers. She is banking the fire, using slow motions to ensure it will still be alive when the family wakes. This was a mainstream reality in medieval households. Fire was precious. Matches did not exist. Lighting a new flame usually meant using flint and steel, a frustrating method that required practice and luck. Keeping the fire alive overnight was the safer choice. The whole evening revolves around that tiny glow. Your eyes adjust to the low light. You notice that everyone moves with quiet discipline. It is not theatrical. It is survival. You listen as someone whispers about how many logs are left. Fuel scarcity shapes everything. People used peat in some regions, dried turf in others, and sometimes even dried dung when wood was not available. The smell of burning dung might not be pleasant, but it delivered heat, and heat meant life. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some medieval villagers believed that certain types of dung produced better heat because the animals had eaten particular herbs. Imagine betting your comfort on what your cow had for lunch. The dim fire throws shadows that sway across the room. You feel those shadows brushing your face as you step deeper inside. The cold still creeps in through every crack. It moves around your ankles, sneaking across the floor like a low mist. Even with the fire, the temperature inside a medieval cottage could drop shockingly low. Families felt cold that modern sleepers rarely experience. You press your hands together, rubbing warmth into your fingers, and you settle near the hearth. The smoky air coats your throat. Someone places a kettle of water near the embers. They are trying to warm it just a little, enough to use for a quick wash before bed. Bathing was not a daily routine. A simple warm rinse was a luxury. You watch the steam swirl faintly upward before vanishing. The room seems to hold its breath. Outside, the wind prowls around the cottage, pushing against the shutters with impatient fists. You notice how the family prepares the sleeping space. They arrange bedding close to the fire, but not too close, because sparks are dangerous. They lay out coarse blankets, woolen coverings, and old cloaks. They know exactly where the warmest patch of floor is, and you see them moving toward it like instinct. Children curl up first, tucking feet into warm pockets of fabric. Adults settle around them in layers. You observe how the family builds heat like a small living furnace. Everybody becomes part of the insulation. You feel the way warmth gathers slowly, like water filling a cup. They blow out candles, saving the last sliver of wax for another night. Darkness folds over the room. The only light comes from the smouldering hearth. You hear one more log crack. The embers' glow flickers. Someone coughs softly. A baby whimpers and quiets again. These tiny sounds shape the rhythm of sleep. When people finally lie down, they do so in a world that is cold, dark, and quiet in a way that modern noise can hardly replicate. You focus on the fire again. It feels like the center of the room, the center of life. Your eyes follow the faint red coals. Hours from now, those coals might be gone. The room might drop to the same temperature as the open air. Some historians still argue whether medieval cottages reached freezing indoor temperatures or hovered slightly above it, but evidence suggests both extremes occurred depending on region, materials, and wind exposure. You sit with that uncertainty, feeling how fragile the line is between tolerable cold and life-threatening chill. You shift your weight, and a stray breeze slips across your face through a crack in the wall. It carries the scent of frozen earth. You understand why people feared winter nights. Without heating, sleep was not just rest. It was a cautious gamble. Every evening felt like a negotiation between your body and the cold. Would your fire last? Would your blankets hold? Would your breath freeze on the inside of your windows by dawn? You sense how the villagers accepted these risks because they had no choice. Another sound rises. The timbers groan as frost tightens them. You hear that deep, wooden creak, and it feels almost like the house is speaking. You glance up at the rafters where small shadows flicker. A hen flutters on her perch. Some families kept small animals inside during winter nights for added warmth. Not just for convenience, but because even the presence of a few warm bodies shifted the temperature. The closeness of human life and animal life is quietly humbling. You breathe in gently and close your eyes. You let the cold settle around you just enough to feel it, but not enough to overwhelm you. You sit with the knowledge that these nights shaped medieval life in ways modern comforts erase. The cold carved routines, shaped sleep patterns, deepened family bonds, and forced people to think about heat every waking moment. You exhale slowly, letting the smoky air drift past your lips. The night deepens, the fire dims. You wait for what comes next, knowing there is still so much to learn about how people survived the harshest hours of winter. You remain beside the dimming hearth until the last ember glow softens into a sleepy murmur of red light. Then you rise, stretch your legs, and step back into the cold. The air bites the tip of your nose with the same sharp clarity as metal pulled from ice water. You let that cold settle into your coat for a moment, so you can feel the contrast between the faint warmth of the cottage and the brutal night outside. It becomes obvious why people learned to rely on more than fire for survival. They relied on each other. They relied on closeness. They relied on the simple truth that a human body is a furnace that never switches off. You follow a narrow path deeper into the village, guided by the crunch of frozen snow beneath your boots. A thin cloud of frost spirals from your breath. Somewhere ahead, you hear muffled voices and low laughter. You edge toward the sound and find a slightly larger cottage with a thick roof of thatch. The doorway is open just a crack, enough to reveal a soft ripple of light. You slip inside and feel the shift immediately. The room is warm, much warmer than you expect. The warmth is not from the hearth alone, it is from the bodies gathered inside. Several families are here together, sharing the same space for the night. You feel the heat of their presence, the soft hum of their conversations, the way their gathered breaths raise the temperature by small degrees. This is the communal warmth trick, the secret that medieval villagers relied upon when the cold became too sharp to handle individually. One mainstream historical fact supports this. In many parts of medieval Europe, it was common for multiple households to sleep in the same large room during winter, especially in smaller communities where housing was flexible and communal expectations were familiar. You watch as people settle onto shared bedding. They arrange straw mattresses, woolen throws, and old cloaks into something resembling a wide nest. Children crawl to the middle, and adults flank the outer edges. You see how each person contributes a pocket of heat, and you sense how this sleeping cluster becomes something larger than its parts. You realize you are watching a survival strategy disguised as closeness. You also notice the smells that come with it. Warm wool, damp clothing, cooked vegetables, and the faint musk of unwashed bodies all mix into a scent that feels lived in rather than foul. It is the smell of warmth in a cold world. A man notices you standing near the door and waves you closer. His gesture is relaxed, almost sleepy. You move toward the cluster and feel the rising heat as you step in. Someone hands you a rough wool blanket that smells of lanolin. You drape it around your shoulders, and the texture scratches your neck. The warmth, however, builds quickly. The blanket traps your body heat and returns it to you. You sink into that feeling. Another villager, a woman with kind eyes, explains that during the hardest winters, people often slept side by side, not out of sentiment but necessity. You picture yourself lying between strangers, sharing breath with people you met only hours ago. It sounds uncomfortable by modern standards, but here it feels natural. The cold does not care about personal space. It encourages people to become a single, layered organism made of cloth and skin and slow breathing. She leans in and whispers a quirky tidbit. Some households believed that sleeping between two particularly warm people could cure colds or fend off evil spirits that thrived in winter darkness. They even had a playful term for it in certain regions. They called it borrowing heat. You consider that phrase, borrowing heat, as though warmth itself was a kind of currency shared among trusted neighbors. You settle beside a small group and lower yourself onto a straw mattress. The mattress cracks and shifts beneath you. It is uneven and prickly, but surprisingly warm. You feel the heat trapped inside the piled straw. The warmth is faint but steady. You lie back and let your eyes adjust to the quiet glow of the fire at the far end of the room. Shadows cast by the communal cluster move gently, creating a shifting tapestry across the walls. A child beside you murmurs something about a dream she had the night before, involving a giant animal made of snow. Her voice is soft, cottony. Her mother shushes her gently and strokes her hair. The fire crackles faintly. You hear the wintry wind pressing against the walls. But here, inside this packed cottage, the cold stays outside for a little while longer. You shift your position, adjusting your legs beneath the blanket. Your body leans slightly into the person next to you. They do not mind. No one minds. Everyone understands their role in this nightly ritual. Even the way people breathe feels coordinated. You breathe in, you breathe out. The warmth builds. Then your thoughts drift toward the science of this moment. You sense how heat radiates from each person, warming the air, warming the bedding, warming the shared space. It occurs to you that this communal technique is not just a cultural practice, it is a biological hack. In a world without heating, body heat is both reliable and renewable. But not everyone agrees on how common or necessary this sleeping method was. Historians still argue whether communal sleeping was universal or simply a regional habit shaped by tradition rather than climate. The debate continues because written records mostly describe wealthier households, leaving everyday practices of peasants and villagers to interpretation. The noise level in the cottage fades into a soft murmur. A few people whisper quiet stories, while others simply close their eyes and drift into half-sleep. You stay awake for a little longer, letting the warm presence of the cluster settle around you. You feel the rhythm of their breaths. You feel the slow relaxation of tired limbs. You feel the contrast between the cutting wind outside and this human cocoon inside. Then someone tucks a large dog into the circle. The dog stretches out, yawns, and curls its body beside a group of children. The added warmth spreads even more. You watch as the dog adjusts itself, nestling deeper into the blankets, becoming another small fire in a room full of tiny furnaces. You let your hand drift across the mattress. The straw has been arranged in tight bundles, creating ridges that feel firm under your fingers. But the mattress warms faster than you expect. Straw traps heat efficiently. That was one of the secrets of medieval bedding. These mattresses were often renewed or fluffed during the day, so that the fibers trapped air. Air becomes insulation. People knew this through instinct and trial, not through scientific vocabulary, but through generations of practice. You close your eyes and picture your modern mattress with its layers of foam and fabric. Then you return your attention to the simple brilliance of straw beneath you. A woman on the far side of the group adjusts the blanket that hangs from a wooden rod above the sleeping space. It falls loosely around the cluster, forming a kind of fabric canopy. This extra layer traps more heat. It reminds you of how modern campers rely on tent insulation. Except here, the tent is improvised from old sheets and animal skins. The air grows warmer, heavier. Your eyelids feel heavy. You hear quiet breathing, soft shuffles, distant wind. These sounds remind you of the first cottage, but here the warmth shifts the mood entirely. This place feels almost safe, almost comfortable. Your thoughts wander for a moment to how different social boundaries were in this world. Privacy was rare. Bodies slept together, worked together, and existed together in ways that modern people rarely experience. Sleep was not an isolated act. It was part of community life. You wonder how many secrets, fears, or friendships grew from nights like this, when people shared warmth and whispered in the dark. Someone beside you shifts their weight, and the mattress crackles again. You feel their movement ripple through the group like a subtle wave. You adjust your own posture, tucking your hands closer to your chest. Your breath fogs faintly in the cold patches of air near the floor but stays warm near your blanket. Then the fire pops. A soft glow spreads across the ceiling beams. You glance upward. Frost glimmers around the edges of the rafters, reflecting the weak light like tiny stars. The ceiling feels close. The room feels smaller than it did before. Everyone here seems wrapped in the same shared dream, drifting together through the coldest night of the year. You breathe out slowly. The warmth around you is enough to lull you into calm relaxation. You no longer feel the bite of winter. You no longer feel the ache in your fingers. You simply feel the slow hum of human closeness. Eventually you open your eyes again. You know you cannot stay here forever. The next part of the village waits. More secrets of winter survival linger in the shadows beyond this door. So you rise quietly, careful not to disturb the sleepers. You wrap the wool blanket around your shoulders one last time. Then you step back into the brittle night air. The cold greets you instantly with its sharp handshake. You inhale deeply, letting the cold reclaim your senses. You feel your warm breath fight against the icy wind. You let the contrast settle into your bones. It is time to move forward. Time to learn what people did after the cluster settled into sleep, how the night unfolded, and what other quiet strategies kept them alive until dawn. You leave the cluster of sleepers behind, stepping once more into the open night where the wind feels sharper and more impatient than before. It prowls across the village like a restless creature, slipping beneath clothing and probing for weaknesses. You draw your coat tighter and follow a faint path lit by the pale shimmer of moonlight on snow. The next home you approach looks older, its thatch sinking a little at the center, and its timber frame leaning as if tired of standing. Yet you smell something familiar as soon as you approach the door. Straw. Dry straw. A scent that is both dusty and warm. A quiet reminder of how simple materials shaped medieval rest. When you enter, you find a single family preparing their bed for the night. They are spreading layers of straw across a wooden frame, sculpting it into a shape that looks almost like a nest. The movement is rhythmic and patient. You feel the warmth of the hearth only faintly here. The fire is mostly embers, dim and soft, but bright enough to reveal the golden texture of the straw. They do not speak much. Winter nights teach silence. They have done this task so many times that each motion seems memorized by the hands. You kneel beside the straw bed and reach out. The fibers crunch softly beneath your fingers. They bend, then spring back slightly. Straw is deceiving. It looks crude, but it is clever in the way it traps air. That trapped air becomes insulation, the same principle used in down jackets and modern sleeping bags. You tilt your head, appreciating something that people in this room likely understood through experience rather than explanation. A commonly acknowledged detail among medieval historians is that straw bedding was replaced fairly often during winter because fresh straw provided better warmth and cleanliness than old flattened bundles. One of the children spreads a thin linen sheet over the straw, smoothing it with small, determined hands. After the linen comes a thicker woolen layer, softening the mattress further. You adjust your position, watching the process with quiet fascination. You see how each layer transforms the rough base into something more forgiving. You notice the smell too. New straw has its own personality. A little sweet, a little dusty, carrying echoes of summer fields now frozen under layers of frost. As you observe, an older man smiles at you and taps the straw mattress. He gestures for you to lie down, just to feel it. You lower yourself slowly, letting your weight settle into the uneven surface. The mattress crackles beneath you, warm in some spots and cooler in others. You shift your shoulders. The sensation is odd at first, but gradually you understand its charm. The bed shapes itself around you like a loose cradle, not perfect but surprisingly comforting in the stillness of winter. The man leans closer and shares something peculiar. He says that in some villages, families mixed aromatic plants like meadowsweet or lavender into their straw bedding because they believed the scents kept pests away and encouraged better dreams. It is a small fragment of folklore he passes on with pride. You smile. The idea of a fragrant medieval mattress feels unexpectedly charming, almost luxurious in a world built around survival. You sit up again, letting the straw shift under your hands. The fire sputters, sending a weak glow across the room. You study the scene. Bedding is not just an object here, it is a crafted environment, a place to restore warmth that the day has drained away. You imagine the countless nights when families return to this same bed, exhausted from long hours of labor. Winter days were short but demanding. The cold stiffened muscles. Food was simple. Clothing was heavy. Every evening felt like a small return to safety. You run your fingers along the linen sheet. It is coarse and slightly rough against your skin. Most households had limited fabric, and linen was laborious to produce. Yet here it lies, stretched across the straw, adding a layer of comfort and hygiene. You realize something that scholars often emphasize in discussions about medieval life. Even the poorest households invested care in their sleeping spaces, because rest was one of their few defenses against illness and exhaustion during harsh seasons. You watch the mother of the family shake out a thick blanket made of wool and patches from older garments. She spreads it over the bed, tucking the edges tightly. The motion is almost ceremonial, as if sealing warmth into the bedding like a promise. You notice how the blanket carries the scent of smoke, lanolin, and long use. It is heavy, heavier than any modern quilt. Its weight seems to press winter away. Your eyes wander to the edges of the room. Bundles of rushes lie against the wall, ready to be scattered across the floor. They insulate the ground and absorb some of the cold rising from the earth. A few clay pots sit near the hearth, containing warm water for the night. A wooden stool holds a small bowl of dried berries, saved from autumn. Every object in the room feels chosen with care and purpose. You shift your attention back to the family. They gather on the bed with graceful familiarity. The father lies near the wall, the mother beside him, the children tucked in where warmth is strongest. You see how they wrap themselves in layers of fabric, how they curl inward like sleeping animals conserving energy. The bed creaks softly under their combined weight. The mother strokes the straw beneath her blanket and whispers something to the children about how the mattress will stay warmer through the night if they lie still and let their bodies sink deeper. She speaks as though passing down a piece of inherited wisdom. You sense that she has said these words before on countless winter nights. As the family settles, you think about the comfort level of such a bed. It is not luxurious by modern standards, but it is functional, warm, and adaptable. Straw has advantages. It resists moisture. It holds heat. It can be replaced easily. You imagine how the bed might feel after a few hours of sleep, warmed by shared breath, shared weight, shared quiet. You listen to the sounds of the room. The small fire pops occasionally. A child sighs softly. The father shifts his leg, and the straw crackles in response. You hear the wind outside, growling and sliding across the roof. The contrast between the chaotic weather outside and the stillness inside feels almost sacred. This straw bed becomes a small island of warmth in a sea of winter. You glance upward and notice faint flickers of frost forming on the inner edges of the window frame. The cold pushes against the wooden shutters, trying to invade the room. But the walls hold firm. The bed holds firm. The people hold each other firmly enough. The older man looks at you again and speaks in a low voice. He tells you that beds like this were temporary by nature. Straw broke down. It flattened. It needed to be replaced. He also adds that people sometimes carried bits of straw in their clothes throughout the day without noticing, a little sign that comfort clung to them wherever they went. You like that image, comfort sticking to them like a quiet companion. Then he laughs softly and mentions an odd detail he remembers from his youth. He says that some people believed mice chose the warmest houses based on the scent of straw, and that families used this as a humorous way to brag about whose home was coziest. It is one of those folk beliefs that reveal as much about personality as it does about practicality. You spend a moment in silence, watching the family drift towards sleep. The room grows dimmer. The fire sinks lower. The air thickens with steady, rhythmic breathing. You feel yourself relaxing again, drawn into their warmth even from a few steps away. You stand slowly, brushing bits of straw from your clothing. The mattress crackles softly in response. You give the family a gentle nod before stepping toward the door. You brace yourself for the cold waiting outside. When you open the door, winter rushes forward instantly, reclaiming you. The temperature drops sharply. Your breath curls upward in pale ribbons. You inhale deeply, letting the icy air clear your senses. You carry with you the memory of warmth, of straw, of shared sleep. You take a few steps away from the cottage, the snow crunching beneath your heels. The night feels larger again. A new question forms quietly in your mind. If this is how common villagers slept, what other hidden strategies did people use to survive nights like this? You tighten your coat and follow the faint outline of another building in the distance, ready to uncover the next piece of winter wisdom. You walk through the biting night again, your boots pressing deep prints into the glittering crust of snow. The sky above feels impossibly clear, as if winter has polished it into a cold crystal dome. Your breath drifts upward in slow curls. You rub your hands together and think about how warmth becomes a rare treasure out here. A treasure protected by layers of cloth, layers of habit, and layers of old knowledge shaped across generations. As you approach the next home, you notice something different about the light leaking through the shutter gaps. It flickers in a softer tone, almost honey-colored. When you push the door open, the first thing you feel is texture. Thick, scratchy, heavy texture wrapping the entire room. Wool is everywhere, hanging from pegs, draped across benches, folded in dense stacks against the wall. It looks like the house is padded from the inside, dressed for winter just as much as its inhabitants are. A woman sits near the smouldering hearth, carding raw wool with steady motions that send soft fibers floating in the air like tiny pale feathers. She looks up, smiles, and gestures for you to step closer. You do. The warmth in the room is faint, but it is clear that wool makes the difference. It holds heat with a stubborn loyalty. It shields skin from cold air. It even muffles sound slightly, giving the house a gentle hush. You lower yourself onto a wooden stool and take in the details. There is a single wide bed in the room, piled high with woolen blankets. Not thin, decorative ones, but thick, weighty layers woven tightly by hand. You brush your fingers across one. It feels coarse but resilient. The lanolin left in the fibers creates a faint, waxy sheen, and the smell is earthy, almost soothing. You observe the family preparing for bed. They move more slowly now, as if winter asks them to save energy even in their gestures. The father shakes out a large blanket that has been passed down for years. Its edges are frayed. Its center is dense and warm. He lays it across the bed with the carefulness of someone handling a precious object. A commonly accepted detail among textile historians explains this scene well. Wool was one of medieval England's most valuable natural materials, both for trade and for daily survival, because it stayed warm even when slightly damp. That single fact-shaped clothing, bedding, and even the economy. You feel it here. You see it in the quiet pride of the household. The mother hands you a woolen tunic so you can understand its weight. You lift it, surprised by how solid it feels. It seems less like clothing and more like armor against winter. When you press the fabric to your cheek, it scratches, but it also radiates a sense of protection. You imagine wearing it to bed, letting that weight settle over your tired limbs. In this world, weight equals comfort. While you observe the tunic, a young boy wanders over and holds up a tiny wool cap. He pats his head, then hands it to you with a grin. It takes you a second to understand. He wants you to try it on. You slip the cap over your head. It fits snugly, covering your ears. Warmth spreads almost instantly. The boy beams, clearly pleased. He begins explaining that everyone in the house sleeps with caps because cold air collects near the ceiling and floor, and the head loses heat more quickly than people expect. His explanation is simple, but it feels rooted in family wisdom. His father chimes in with a playful detail. He tells you that in some villages, people believed sleeping without a nightcap let winter spirits nibble at your thoughts, making your dreams confused or restless. It is a small piece of folklore, shared with a laugh but remembered as part of the seasonal rhythm. The idea lingers in your mind with strange charm. You watch as the family settles onto the bed. They layer themselves in wool, starting with lighter blankets at the bottom and heavier ones near the top. The mother smooths the edges so no draft can slip in. You notice how the children naturally curl toward warmth, tucking their feet beneath the thick folds. You sit beside the bed for a moment and let your hand rest on the uppermost blanket. The heat building beneath it feels steady and confident. Wool does not warm instantly. It warms gradually, like a slow-burning ember, gathering heat from the sleepers themselves. Each breath, each shift, each moment contributes to the rising temperature. The father adds another layer, but this time it is something exceptional. A rich, dark wool woven more finely than the others. You run your hand across it. It feels smoother, almost silky in comparison. He explains that this piece is made from the fleece of their best sheep, sheared in late spring, spun carefully, and woven by his own mother. You sense the emotional weight in his voice. This blanket carries memory, labor, and hope. Winter has a way of making sentimental objects practical and vice versa. You glance around the room and notice something else. The walls are draped with rough woolen cloth. This is not decoration, it is defense. Hanging wool along the interior walls creates a barrier against drafts, trapping warm air near the bed. The fabric shifts slightly when wind presses against the exterior timbers. It moves like a kind of soft shield. As you examine the room, the older woman carding wool finally speaks. She mentions that wool garments were often brushed with certain oils or fat mixtures to improve their ability to repel moisture. She laughs quietly and says the smell could be unpleasant, but the warmth was worth it. You sense her experience in every word. She pauses her carding and tells you something scholars often discuss when studying medieval winters. She explains that wool was not just for warmth, it also represented stability. It was a resource families relied on, traded with, paid rent through, and depended upon for almost every season of life. The wool trade fed entire regions. Even kings measured part of their wealth in fleece. Understanding wool is understanding the medieval world. As the family drifts towards sleep, the room grows quieter. The fire settles into a gentle red pulse. Shadows soften. The wool curtains along the walls ripple faintly, as if breathing with the night. You let your own body relax, absorbing the warmth that seems to float through the room like invisible steam. A young girl pulls her blanket tighter and mutters something drowsy about how she hopes the cold does not creep under the door tonight. Her brother reassures her by pulling her closer. Their voices, tired and warm, melt into the air. You sit there in that softness for several minutes. You listen to the faint whir of the wool carder as the older woman finishes her last handful of fiber for the night. You hear the faint whistle of wind outside. You hear the bed creak as someone adjusts their legs. You understand in this moment how deeply wool shaped comfort in a world without heating. It was not fancy. It was not glamorous. But it was faithful. It trapped body heat, softened rough bedding, wrapped children and elders in protective weight, and transformed freezing rooms into tolerable havens. Eventually you rise, returning the cap to the cheerful boy. You pull your coat tight and step back toward the door. The woman smiles at you once more, then dims the lantern. When you step outside, the cold hits you immediately, but you carry the memory of warmth with you like a hidden ember tucked beneath your clothing. Wool survives beyond the fire. It lingers in your skin, your senses, your understanding. You walk away from the cottage, watching your breath drift upward like pale smoke, ready to discover the next way medieval people turned impossible cold into survivable night. You continue through the sleeping village, your footsteps sinking into soft layers of snow that sparkle beneath the moonlight. The cold wraps around you with fresh determination, slipping into seams and tugging at your sleeves. It feels colder now than before, as if the night has deepened its grip. You hug your arms to your chest and wander toward a larger building near the center of the settlement. The silhouette tells you this home belongs to someone with status. The roof is higher. The timber beams are straighter. A faint golden glow leaks through shutter cracks in thicker streams than the poorer cottages allowed. You sense warmth inside, not the thin survival heat you left behind, but something richer. When you enter, you feel it instantly. The air here carries a gentle softness, the sort that signals privilege. The fire in the hearth is still alive, not merely embers glowing in surrender. Logs burn with patient strength, sending waves of warmth rolling across the room in slow pulses. A subtle scent of beeswax and roasted grain drifts through the air. The floors are cleaner, covered with woven carpets that mute your steps. You take a few more steps inside, letting the warmth seep through your clothing until your shoulders relax. This is a wealthier household, and wealth means options. The difference becomes clear as you lift your eyes to the centerpiece of the room, a magnificent featherbed resting atop a carved wooden frame, elevated proudly above the cold ground. You approach it slowly, drawn to its height and soft, overstuffed shape. The feather bed looks impossibly plush compared to the straw mattresses of the previous cottages. Its surface curves slightly, as if welcoming a tired body with open arms. A man of the house, dressed in a padded robe lined with fur, notices your interest and gestures for you to come closer. His movements are unhurried. He carries the relaxed confidence of someone protected from the harshest realities of winter. When you stand beside the feather bed, he pats it affectionately. You sink your hand into the top layer and feel it yield under your touch, soft and buoyant. The feathers shift inside, adjusting to your pressure with a luxurious whisper. You almost expect warmth to bloom immediately beneath your palm. It feels like a small escape from the cold, hidden in plain sight. The man explains that this feather bed belonged to his father, and before that to his grandfather. These items lasted for generations when cared for properly. He mentions that goose down from well-tended flocks produced the warmest, lightest filling, prized even more than wool by those who could afford it. He tells you something widely noted in economic histories. Featherbeds were so valuable that they often appeared in wills, listed alongside land, livestock, or gold. The idea stays with you, a testament to how deeply winter shaped priorities. His wife approaches, holding a linen sheet she has just finished inspecting. The cloth is smooth, finer than most people could ever buy. She spreads it over the feather bed with calm precision. The sheet falls gently, settling into the soft contours beneath. Next, she adds a quilt made of dyed wool squares stitched into patterns. The seams show years of repair. She smooths it fondly, as though tending a beloved companion rather than an object. Then she lifts a second quilt. You recognize something different in its weight and richness. This one is filled with down as well. When she unfolds it, the fabric drifts through the air with slow grace. You watch how it traps warmth almost immediately. She tells you they layer blankets in winter based on the cold. Tonight is especially harsh, so they will use both quilts. You imagine the weight and comfort of lying beneath them. It must feel like sleeping under a warm cloud. A young servant steps into the room, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He lays it gently on the edge of the bed. When he unwraps it, you see several small feather-filled pillows, unusually plump and clean. He shakes them briskly, fluffing them to restore their shape. The feathers inside rustle quietly. You catch the scent of dried herbs, tucked lightly into the pillow linings. He explains that the herbs discourage insects and add a faint, soothing smell for sleep. A detail often mentioned in medieval household records comes to mind. Wealthier families sometimes perfumed their bedding with mixtures of herbs such as rose petals, marjoram, or chamomile. It was not only pleasant, but believed to influence dreams in healthier directions. You breathe in, detecting a hint of chamomile lingering in the room. It calms you in a way you did not expect. You step back to observe the entire bed as it comes together layer by layer. It resembles a miniature hill of comfort in the center of the room, capable of holding heat far better than any bundle of straw or pile of cloaks. You imagine how the owners sink into it each night, feeling their bodies enveloped in softness while the winter rages outside. As the couple continues preparing for sleep, the man mentions an interesting dispute that scholars sometimes bring up when studying medieval households. He says that some old accounts claim featherbeds were kept away from the coldest walls to prevent feather clumping, while others suggest families placed them near interior walls for insulation. He shrugs gently, acknowledging that practices varied. Explanations differ depending on region, tradition, and available space. No one can be certain which was more common. You sit on the edge of the feather bed, letting your weight sink into the soft layers. It feels entirely different from straw, wool, or shared communal warmth. This is a deliberate luxury made possible by economic stability. You shift slightly. The bed shifts with you, absorbing motion smoothly. A sense of security settles into your muscles. You understand why such beds were treasured. The mother of the house shows you another item. She brings out a fabric cover stuffed with feathers that they call a bolster. She places it near the head of the bed. It serves as both back support and a barrier against drafts. You touch it and feel it spring gently beneath your fingers. You admire how each item, each small improvement, builds layers of comfort that transform the sleeping space into a winter refuge. A girl, likely their daughter, approaches carrying a fur coverlet. The fur is soft and dark. She lays it across the foot of the bed. You brush it with your hand. It feels warm even before anyone touches it. Fur retains heat in a way that almost seems magical. She tells you that on the coldest nights, she pulls it all the way up to her chin. You picture her sleeping beneath it, safe from the icy winds. The father sets a wooden chest beside the bed and opens it. Inside are more blankets, folded neatly. He chooses one made of thickly woven wool, dyed in deep, earthy colors. He spreads it across the bed as the final layer. The structure of the bedding now resembles a fortress built from comfort rather than stone. The featherbed base supports everything above it. Quilts and blankets lock in heat. The fur coverlet adds protection. The linen sheet provides softness against the skin. You feel grateful just looking at it. Then you notice something else in the room. A small tapestry hangs near the bed, depicting a hunting scene. The thick fabric helps block drafts from the wall. Wealthier families often use tapestries for insulation as well as decoration. The image on it glows in the firelight. A deer leaps through a woven forest. A hound follows in mid-stride. The colors flicker like living flame. The daughter speaks softly, explaining that she likes falling asleep while staring at the tapestry. The shapes blur in the dimming firelight and become something dreamy. Her mother smiles and gently brushes her hair. You feel a warmth that does not come from fire or feathers, but from family tenderness. As they finish preparing, the household grows quieter. The fire still burns, but its crackles soften. The room fills with an intimate calm. You sit on the featherbed, feeling yourself drawn towards sleep by the gentle pull of the quilts and the rhythmic breathing around you. Then you stand, knowing you must continue your journey. The father thanks you for visiting. The mother gives a small bow of farewell. You step toward the door, feeling the weight of warmth in your clothing. The feather bed lingers in your senses like a soft memory. When you step outside again, the cold shocks your lungs. The wind sweeps across you, urging you forward. You exhale slowly, watching your breath drift upward. The village waits with more secrets, more fires, more beds, more ways humans learn to soften a harsh night. You keep walking. You continue along the silent village lane, feeling the icy wind press against your coat as if trying to herd you back indoors. But curiosity pushes you forward. You want to know how else people in this age carved out warmth from a world determined to freeze them. Your boots crunch through the powdered snow until you reach a cottage that looks different from the others. It is narrower and slightly taller, its upper floor jutting out over the lower one like a protective brow. A thin trail of smoke leaks from a small chimney. The shutters are closed tight, and yet you sense something unusual inside. When you ease the door open, a gentle pocket of warmth drifts out. It is not as strong as the heat in the wealthier home you visited, but it is unmistakably warmer than the open room you expect. You step inside and suddenly the layout becomes clear. This house has a built-in sleeping niche carved directly into the wall. You stare at it with growing fascination. The niche is like a wooden box tucked into the structure of the house, raised slightly above the floor and enclosed on three sides by thick timber walls. A curtain hangs across the open side. When you push the curtain aside, a small compartment reveals itself, just large enough for two adults to lie curled within it. You can smell wool, dry straw, and the faint lingering scent of herbs. The space feels cocooned, sheltered from drafts that wander freely through the main room. A woman seated near the hearth looks up from her mending and smiles. She tells you softly that this niche has served her family for 3 generations. You crouch down and run your fingers along the smooth wood of the inner walls. Warmth lingers there. You notice that the wood seems slightly darker where years of body heat have soaked into it. Someone added a layer of old wool along the back wall for insulation. You can imagine how the small space transforms into a pocket of comfort once bodies settle inside it. She invites you to climb in for a moment, When you do, the difference shocks you. Inside the niche, your breath warms the air quickly. The ceiling is low, and the space is small enough that the cold cannot chase you. You feel like you are tucked inside the house itself, embraced by its structure. This is warmth created not by fire or luxury, but by clever design. The family uses the niche the way people today might use a sleeping bag. You let your hands rest on the worn blanket beneath you, noticing the soft rise of old straw shifting underneath. The woman explains that these enclosed beds, sometimes called wall beds or tucked beds, became popular in certain regions because houses were drafty and heating fuel was limited. A widely repeated detail in architectural history notes that these niches trapped heat remarkably well, especially when paired with thick curtains. They turned the act of sleeping into a kind of retreat from the night. You imagine families sliding inside, drawing the curtain, and closing themselves into a warm cocoon while winter prowled outside. The woman gestures toward the main room. She points out that the shape of the house funnels cold air through certain corners but never into the niche. The niche sits above the floor where cold settles, but below the roof where warm air escapes. It is positioned exactly where warmth lingers longest. You admire the intelligence behind the design. It shows how architecture adapts to climate even when builders work with simple tools and local materials. She sits beside you and continues mending a pair of woolen socks. She mentions that when she was a child, she loved climbing into the niche on winter afternoons just to feel how quickly it warmed around her. She smiles at the memory, describing how she used to pretend it was a secret cave protected from snow spirits. Her voice is soft, but her eyes shine with fondness. A little boy runs over and crawls into the niche beside you. He sets down a small wooden horse carved from a scrap of oak. He tells you that this is his favorite place in the house because the niche feels like it hugs him. You laugh quietly as he snuggles deeper into the blankets. Children know warmth instinctively. They gravitate toward it like birds finding sheltered branches. The woman adds another detail, a bit of oral wisdom passed down by her ancestors. She explains that some people believed sleeping in enclosed spaces allowed dreams to grow clearer because the mind stayed warmer and more relaxed. Whether or not that is true, the idea feels charming. She shrugs gently, acknowledging that traditions grow from both practicality and imagination. You settle against the back wall of the niche, letting your breath warm the small chamber. The space grows noticeably more comfortable after only a few minutes. The boy shifts closer to you, giggling when your elbow brushes his arm. The privacy of this nook feels rare in a world where most families live in single-room houses. You realize how valuable even a small sense of enclosure must have been during harsh winters. The fire crackles faintly at the far end of the room. The orange light dances through the curtain opening, casting soft shapes on the wooden ceiling. You listen to the sounds of the house. Wind taps at the shutters. The fire shifts with gentle pops. The woman hums quietly as she sews. Everything feels intimate, protected. After a while, you lean out of the niche and study the exterior structure more closely. The wooden frame surrounding it is thick. You notice that the builders reinforced it with additional planks, likely to block drafts that slip through the outer walls. Straw has been packed between the planks and sealed with a mixture of clay and hair. You press your hand against the wall. It is warmer than the rest of the room. The insulation makes a difference. The woman tells you that her family sleeps in the niche on the coldest nights, leaving the wider bed in the main room for storing spare blankets and clothing. She laughs and says that when her children were younger, they used to hide inside the niche during play, pretending it was a ship sailing across icy seas. In winter, imagination becomes another tool for survival. As you step out of the niche and stretch your muscles, the boy crawls out with you, clutching his wooden horse. He hands it to you as a temporary gift, saying you can borrow it for the night. You tuck it into your coat pocket with a smile. You thank the woman for letting you experience the niche. She nods warmly, then closes the curtain to save the warmth inside. The fabric rustles softly and falls into place. You stand for a moment, watching the gentle sway of the curtain before turning toward the door. When you step outside again, the cold does not feel quite as sharp. You carry a memory of compact, sheltered comfort inside you, a sense of closeness to the house, to the people, to the winter itself. The snowflakes drifting from the sky seem gentler now, almost like soft reminders of how humans reshape their environment with creativity. You breathe in deeply. The air tingles in your lungs. The night is still vast, but you feel braver facing it. There are more secrets to winter sleep, more corners of history waiting. You take another step forward, ready for the next discovery. You move away from the house with the snug sleeping niche, feeling the cold wrap itself around you again, like a determined reminder that comfort in this world is temporary. The wind sighs through the village lanes. Snow swirls in thin spirals across the ground, whispering against your boots as you walk. You take a slow breath, watching it fog in front of you, and follow the faint flicker of firelight leaking from another cottage nearby. Something about the silhouette of this home draws your attention. The roof is a little steeper, the walls more tightly packed with daub, and the shutters have thick cloth draped over their inner frames. As you approach, you notice long strips of fabric hanging near the doorway, pulling slightly in the draft. You step inside the cottage and immediately feel why. Heavy bed curtains dominate the room, enclosing the sleeping area in thick folds of fabric. The hearth glows gently, but it is clear that the main source of warmth in this house comes from something far less dynamic than fire. It comes from cloth, thick, breathless, shielding cloth. A man sits near the bed, carefully brushing a curtain panel with a stiff bristle broom to remove dust. He looks up, smiles, and invites you to come closer. You move toward the bed and feel the temperature shift with each step. The air surrounding the enclosed space is noticeably warmer than the rest of the room. You part the curtains slightly, and warm air sighs against your face like a gentle welcome. Inside the curtained space are 2 straw mattresses layered with soft wool blankets. The woman of the house sits on the mattress, adjusting small herbs tied in little cloth bundles along the curtain rods. She explains that they hang these fragrant bundles to freshen the air and reduce the musty smell caused by humidity trapped inside the curtains. Their scent is earthy and soothing, a mix of lavender, marjoram, and dried mint. You breathe it in and feel a momentary calm settle over you. She pats the mattress and invites you to sit. When you do, the curtain fabric falls behind you with a soft thump. The enclosed bed suddenly feels like a warm bubble, sealed off from the relentless cold outside. You run your hand along the inside of the curtain. It is thick, almost quilted, layers of woolen cloth stitched together. The woman explains that fabric like this does not flow easily, and that is the point. The less air that moves through it, the more heat stays trapped inside. She smiles and adds that in some households, bed curtains were so prized that they were mentioned in dowries, passed between generations, or even used to settle debts. The idea amuses you, a curtain as currency, but after sitting inside this warm pocket of air, you understand why. In winter, warmth is wealth. You lean back a little and let the curtain fall into its natural position. Light filters through the fabric in soft gold patterns, giving the tiny enclosed space a half-dreamlike quality. Outside, the wind whistles faintly through the gaps in the shutters, but the curtain muffles it until it becomes nothing more than a distant hum. You suddenly feel the cocoon effect that medieval people depended on. It is a small sanctuary born from fabric and breath. The man joins you and points out the wooden frame above the bed that supports the curtains. He explains that the frame must be strong enough to carry the weight of the cloth, which grows heavier in winter as dampness creeps in from the breath of sleeping bodies. He knocks on the frame lightly, and the wood answers with a dull, confident sound. He tells you that this frame is older than he is. He grew up sleeping beneath it. His own father added panels to it when the winters grew harsher. As the woman adjusts a blanket, she explains something often repeated in studies of medieval domestic life. Curtains were not just about keeping warmth in, they were also about privacy. Most families lived in one large room, so these curtains offered a rare sense of separation. Behind them, people whispered stories, shared secrets, or simply enjoyed the illusion of solitude. You imagine how precious that privacy must have felt after a day of constant work and shared space. You reach out and trace a line of stitching along the curtain. The needlework is simple but strong, done with thick thread, designed to endure constant pulling. The woman tells you that she stitched these curtains herself, adding patches whenever they grew thin. She points to a faded square of fabric that once belonged to her grandmother's cloak. It adds strength and memory at the same time. The man laughs softly and tells you a bit of village humor. Some people joked that if your bed curtains had too many holes, the cold would slip in like an unwanted guest and join the family in bed. He taps one patched area and nods approvingly, proud of their handiwork. His smile carries the warmth of someone who knows how much these curtains protect him through winter. You sit quietly for a moment, absorbing the comfort inside the curtained bed. The sensation of warmth creeping into your limbs feels like a reward after walking through the icy village night. You lean back and let yourself savor the stillness, listening to the low crackle of the hearth beyond the curtain. After a short while, you lift the curtain and step out. The temperature difference hits you immediately like a cold hand pressing against your chest. You inhale sharply. The room outside the curtain feels several degrees colder. You instinctively pull your coat tighter. The contrast tells you everything about the brilliance of this simple design. The woman now rearranges the blankets inside the bed. She fluffs one woolen layer and tucks it at the foot of the mattress. She speaks softly about how much heat the curtains save, not just through insulation but through trapping body warmth. Once people settle inside and breathe together, the bed warms like a miniature room. The husband nods and adds that on the harshest nights, they sometimes hang an extra curtain layer, creating a second barrier that helps trap more warmth. He gestures to a folded curtain hanging neatly near the wall. You run your hand along its coarse surface. It feels heavy, like winter pressed into cloth. He also mentions an interesting debate that researchers occasionally discuss when studying medieval fabric practices. Some argue that households used bed curtains not only for warmth, but also as a way to display status through fabric quality, while others claim the designs were mostly practical and rarely decorative. He shrugs, acknowledging that both ideas may hold truth depending on the household. There was no single correct way to survive the cold. You crouch down and look at the bottom of the curtains where they brush the floor. The edges are weighted with small stones sewn into the hem. You lift one slightly. It tugs downward, ensuring the curtain falls straight and seals the warm space more effectively. This detail surprises you. It is clever and subtle, a reminder of how people solved problems with creativity. The woman folds her hands and tells you that she sometimes reads to her children inside the curtains by candlelight, though very carefully because open flames near fabric are dangerous. She describes how the curtain glows softly when lit from inside, turning the bed into a tiny illuminated den. You picture that tender image, a mother reading stories in warm half-darkness while the cold wraps tightly around the outside walls. She invites you to lie down for a moment to fully understand the comfort. You settle onto the mattress and pull a section of curtain closed. The warmth wraps around you almost instantly. The stillness inside makes you feel suspended, sheltered from everything beyond the cloth. It is astonishing how a simple set of heavy curtains can create such a gentle haven. You stay there only long enough to appreciate the ingenuity of the design, then rise again, knowing your journey is far from finished. The couple thanks you for visiting. You offer them a grateful nod and step toward the door. When you leave the cottage, the cold snaps at you immediately. But now you feel ready for it. You have seen how people push back against winter with fabric alone. You walk down the snowy path, breath rising like ghosts in the air, eager for the next shelter and the next secret of medieval nights. You continue down the icy path, the wind tugging at your sleeves with playful cruelty, as if reminding you that comfort never lasts long out here. A thin veil of snow drifts from the rooftops each time a gust sweeps through the village. You pull your collar higher and keep walking, guided by faint sounds that roll through the night. Low grunts, shuffling hooves, the muffled rustle of hay. These are not sounds of people. These are nighttime voices of the animals that share the rhythms of winter with the villagers. You follow the noise until you reach a sturdy timber building attached to a small cottage. Warm breath curls from gaps between the boards, glowing in the moonlight like mist rising from hidden springs. You step closer and smell it instantly. The deep, earthy scent of livestock, warm hide, dried hay, old straw. It is a dense aroma, familiar and grounding. You push open the barn door and step into heat so sudden that you inhale sharply out of surprise. The barn radiates warmth in a way you have not felt in any human dwelling so far. Animals create their own climate. Their bodies release steady heat, and the thick bedding beneath them insulates it further. You pause, letting your eyes adjust to the dim lantern hanging near the door. The light reveals cows shifting lazily, a pair of goats chewing cud even at this late hour, and a few chickens perched on a beam, feathers puffed out like tiny winter coats. A man sits on a wooden stool near a cow, mending a harness with slow, deliberate stitches. He looks up and greets you with sleepy friendliness. He gestures for you to come in and close the door to keep the warmth inside. You do, and the temperature rises even more, embracing you like a heavy blanket. The difference is astonishing. Outside, the cold stings. In here, it feels almost like early spring. The man explains that during the harshest winters, families often slept in or near the barn, especially if their house was poorly insulated. He chuckles softly and says that cows are more reliable than fire because they never let their body heat drop. You glance around the space again, feeling a sense of practicality woven into every beam. The barn is not simply a workplace. It is a shelter for humans as much as animals. He invites you to follow him into a corner where a raised wooden platform sits beneath a thick overhang. On the platform rests a simple bed made of straw, covered with a coarse wool blanket. It looks rough but inviting compared to the freezing outdoors. He pats the blanket and tells you that sometimes, on the coldest nights, his family moves out here to sleep with the animals. It was never considered shameful. It was considered sensible. You sit on the edge of the platform and feel the warmth rising from the ground. You run your hand through the straw. It is dry and thick, holding pockets of heat like tiny insulated chambers. Above you, the cow flicks its ears, shifting its weight with a low rumble. A wave of warm air rolls over you again. The cow's breath steams the air in soft puffs. The man laughs quietly and shares a light-hearted piece of rural wisdom. He says that goats are better bed companions than cows because goats wiggle closer, while cows prefer to remain dignified and keep their distance. He follows the joke with a story about a neighbor who claimed his goat once stole his blanket during the night. Whether or not that tale is true, it adds a charming layer to the image. He steps over to a pig pen where a pair of plump pigs nestle together under a mound of hay. Pigs generate remarkable warmth. Some families would let them sleep in attached sheds or even in special corners of the house during winter nights. You watch the pigs breathe in slow tandem, their bodies radiating heat like small furnaces. The man taps the fence gently and says that pigs are loyal sources of warmth, though not exactly scent-free. You smile despite the lingering odor in the air. You hear a soft clucking sound above you. One of the chickens shifts on its beam, feathers ruffling. Chickens do not produce as much heat as larger animals, but their presence still lifts the temperature of the room by a few degrees. More important, they contribute to the sense of shared life. You look up at them and think about how many medieval nights were warmed by the presence of creatures whose survival was intertwined with human survival. The man now gestures toward the main cottage entrance that connects to the barn. He explains that in some homes, the cottage and the animal shelter shared a wall, so warmth could seep from one into the other. People took advantage of every bit of heat nature offered. He lifts a lantern and points to the wooden boards in the shared wall. They are warm to the touch. The animals on the other side breathe, shifting gently, and their warmth passes through as if moving with intention. While you walk with him, he mentions an observation commonly discussed in studies of medieval farming life. The reliance on animals for warmth was not seen as crude or primitive. It was viewed as a wise use of resources. Livestock were central to the family's survival, and their warmth was a natural gift in bitter winters. He brushes his hand along the flank of a cow and smiles with quiet pride. You crouch near the straw bedding again, letting your fingers sift through it. The heat from the animals mixes with the earthy scent of hay, creating a strange but comforting atmosphere. The barn feels alive, full of steady breathing and slow movements. There is a calming rhythm here, no hurried shuffling, no chattering voices, just the sound of creatures resting together against the night. The man sits back on his stool and tells you about an ongoing debate among agricultural historians. Some believe that sleeping in barns was a significant winter practice among the rural poor across England, while others argue it was less common and mostly reserved for emergencies or extreme weather. Written records differ, and oral accounts are scattered, leaving room for interpretation. He shrugs, acknowledging the uncertainty, and adds that in this village families do whatever the cold demands. You continue observing the barn. The lantern light glows softly across rough wooden beams, catching flecks of dust drifting like tiny sparks. You smell warm hay, animal breath, and faint smoky hints carried from the hearth next door. These scents blend into something raw and honest. A young girl enters the barn with a small basket of grain. Her cheeks are pink from the cold outside. She sprinkles the grain into a wooden trough and pats the side of a goat affectionately. When she notices you watching, she smiles shyly and tells you this is her favorite place in winter. She says the barn feels like a big breathing blanket wrapped around all of them. You find her words simple yet perfect. A breathing blanket. That is exactly what it feels like. As she finishes her chores, she picks up a handful of hay and tosses it playfully toward a chicken. The chicken clucks indignantly, hops twice, then resettles on its perch. The girl laughs softly. Her father joins her, and they speak for a moment in low, gentle tones. You can sense that this barn is more than a shelter. It is a place where family gathers, works, and sometimes sleeps. The girl looks at you again and tells you that when the wind screams through the village and frost forms on the inside of the cottage windows, they stay here. Her mother warms stones by the hearth and brings them to the barn to place under the bedding. Her father stacks extra hay along the walls to block drafts. They sleep close together, wrapped in thick blankets, listening to the animals breathe. She describes it as cozy, like sharing dreams with the creatures they care for. You feel a quiet admiration settle in your chest. This simple barn, with its coarse straw and earthy smells, reveals a warmth more genuine than luxury. It shows how deeply intertwined their lives are with the animals that sustain them. Here, survival is a shared effort among humans and beasts alike. You thank the family and step back toward the barn door. When you push it open, the cold greets you again with icy teeth. But this time you carry a different understanding of warmth. Not just heat from fire or fabric, but warmth born from connection, instinct, and cooperation. You exhale slowly, watching your breath drift into the night, and continue down the snowy path in search of the next story waiting in the dark. You walk on, guided now by a faint shimmering glow that seems to pulse gently in the distance. The village has grown quieter, the wind settling into long, steady breaths that sweep over the snow like soft brushes. Your boots sink slightly with each step, the cold tightening around your ankles in little pinches. You follow the glow until the silhouettes of tall timbers rise ahead. The building is larger than any cottage you have entered so far, with high walls and thick beams that cast long shadows in the moonlight. This must be the manor's great hall, the heart of warmth and authority in a medieval community. You approach the heavy door. Light seeps through its edges, warm and promising. When you push it open, a gust of heat washes against you in a slow wave. You inhale, letting your chest loosen with relief. The hall is enormous, far wider than the cottages scattered across the village. The ceiling disappears into darkness. The air carries aromas of roasted grain, wood smoke, and resin. Across the stone floor, The last fire of the evening still flickers, burning low but glowing with a calm reddish hue that fills the hall with soft light. Several servants are finishing their nightly tasks. They sweep ash near the hearth, fold blankets, and set wooden mugs upside down on tables for the next day. Their movements are quiet, unhurried, worn down by a long routine. You step closer to the hearth, drawn as if by magnetism. The heat is stronger here than in the cottages. Even though the fire is fading, large stones around the hearth radiate stored warmth. You kneel and place your hand near them. The heat ripples upward gently, almost soothing your chilled fingers back to life. One of the servants nods to you as he collects firewood for the morning. He explains that the great hall fire burns much longer than household hearths because it is built with large logs. He gestures to a thick, partially charred log resting in the embers. Its surface glows in streaks of deep orange. He tells you that these big logs are meant to last through most of the night, so the Lord's family and their guests do not wake in freezing conditions. He crouches beside you, and adds that the heat from the great hall often helps warm the surrounding chambers too, even if only slightly. It is one of the few places in the village where you can feel warmth long after the flames have died down. You nod, understanding why people cherish the time spent near this fire. You sit on a low bench near the hearth. The thick stone radiates heat beneath you. You glance across the hall, noticing how everything glows with amber tones. Tapestries along the walls flutter faintly with the movement of warm air. Their woven scenes of hunts and battles shimmer in the firelight. The colours appear almost alive. A young woman approaches, carrying an armful of rushlights. She places them near a table and pauses to warm her hands by the fire. She tells you that she and the others often sleep in the hall during harsh winter nights, spreading their blankets near the embers after the household retires to private chambers. The lingering heat offers more comfort than their cold servants' quarters. She smiles shyly, then begins trimming the ends of the rushlights with a small knife. You watch her work, noting how the smell of resin mixes with the warm air. She explains that they dip the rush pith in animal fat to make them burn longer. The idea is simple but effective, giving a soft glow to the hall long after sunset. You imagine the hall at night, dimly lit by faint flames while people asleep nearby, breathe in slow harmony with the embers. You stand and walk closer to the hearth, noticing the thick iron andirons that support the massive logs. Their surfaces glow faintly with absorbed heat. You place your hand near one and feel warmth radiating off it. Heat lingers here with surprising loyalty. Even as the fire shrinks into a cluster of glowing coals, the warmth remains like a memory. A man steps in from a side door, wrapped in a heavy cloak. He rubs his arms and tells you that this hall is built to trap heat. The high roof lets smoke drift upward, but the thick stone walls absorb warmth and release it slowly. He taps a wall with his knuckles. The stone feels warm under your touch. It is remarkable. In this age of thin walls and leaky roofs, this hall feels almost indulgent. He mentions a point often noted in architectural studies. Larger halls, especially those belonging to nobles or wealthy landowners, were constructed with materials that helped retain warmth. Stone absorbs heat from the fire during the day and radiates it back during the coldest hours of the night. You can feel that principle in action with every breath you take inside the hall. He moves to the far side of the room where a large wooden table sits, still draped with daytime clutter. A half-eaten loaf, a pair of wooden bowls, a dog curled beneath the bench. The dog lifts its head, sniffs the warm air, and drops back into sleep. Animals, even here, share the same search for comfort. The servant leads you to a smaller alcove at the edge of the hall. Inside, a bed made from layered blankets sits near a half-open window shutter. He explains that sometimes the younger servants compete for this sleeping spot because it is closest to the stones warmed by the hearth all day. You kneel and place your hand on the bed. The blankets feel heavy and warm, infused with the heat that lingers in the hall's core. He laughs and adds a small story. Last winter, 2 servants raced across the hall to claim this warm spot at bedtime. only to discover that the Lord's hound had already curled up there and refused to move. The group ended up sleeping around the dog, grateful for its warmth. The story makes you smile, a small glimpse into the playful side of winter life. The woman with the rushlights returns and begins placing them in wall holders. Their dim glow joins the fading hearthlight. She tells you quietly that even in noble homes, nights get cold enough to numb fingers and stiffen joints, but the fire in the great hall protects them better than anything else available. The servants gather here before the embers vanish and whisper stories, singing sometimes in soft voices until sleep catches them. She pauses and shares a fragment of folklore that her grandmother used to tell. If a person slept too far from the hearth during a deep freeze, their dreams could wander into landscapes of frost, and they might not find the path back to their body by morning. The belief is poetic rather than literal, but it speaks to the deep respect people held for warmth during nights like this. As you stand again near the center of the hall, you take in the whole room one more time. The tapestries glow with reflected fire, the stones breathe heat, the soft sounds of a dog shifting echo faintly. The servants' footprints in the ash-laden floor tell stories of a long day. You feel immersed in their world, sensing the balance between luxury and necessity. A slight crack from the hearth catches your attention. One of the embers breaks apart, revealing a brighter glow inside. A wave of heat sweeps outward, touching your face. You savor it, knowing that the fire will fade soon, and the hall will cool into another long winter night. You step toward the door, preparing to leave. The servants nod farewell. You push the door open and feel the cold rush in, eager to reclaim the air. You inhale sharply as the temperature difference shocks your senses. Outside, the village lies quiet under a cloak of moonlit snow. You take a few steps away from the hall, feeling both chilled and warmed by what you have just experienced. There is still more to discover. More ways people endured the biting cold, more nights waiting to be understood. You walk on, breath rising in pale ribbons as you move toward the next flicker of life in the winter darkness. You leave the great hall behind, stepping once more into the breathless cold that sweeps across the open space like an invisible tide. The wind has grown sharper, carrying fine grains of snow that sting your cheeks. You tuck your chin deeper into your collar and walk toward the dim outline of a small peasant cottage farther down the lane. A faint orange glow seeps through its shutters, weaker than the glow in the hall yet persistent, like a cautious flame guarding its last strength. As you approach, you smell something familiar, the scent of slowly dying fire, earthy, smoky, tinged with resin. When you step inside, the first thing you notice is the family hovering around their hearth with almost ceremonial attention. The fire is not roaring. It is low, nearly swallowed by ash, but still alive. The embers glow through a thin blanket of white dust, glimmering like tiny buried suns. A woman kneels on the hearthstone, lifting a small wooden rake. She works with gentle care, pulling the ash forward and spreading it over the embers with practiced rhythm. The man of the house holds a charred log, its end glowing faintly. He does not place it directly on the embers. Instead, he tucks it into the ashes as if planting heat for the next morning. They are banking the fire, not tending it, not feeding it, banking it. A process older than recorded time, a ritual that decides how harsh the morning will feel. You kneel beside them and watch closely. The woman explains that this is the final task before sleep. Ash insulates the embers, slowing their loss of heat. If done correctly, the coals will survive the long winter night. If done poorly, they will wake to cold ash and a difficult morning of coaxing sparks from flint and steel. She adds that this practice shapes the rhythm of winter evenings. Families finish their chores early, eat early, and settle early, so they have enough time to cool the hearth just enough before burying its heart beneath ash. The idea fascinates you. It is like putting the fire to bed, trusting that it will still be warm beneath the covers by sunrise. The man looks up at you and smiles, saying that the banking process carries small risks. If the ash layer is too thin, the embers will die. If the ash is too thick, the fire might smother completely. He gestures to a wooden paddle with a curved edge, its surface blackened by countless nights of handling embers. This paddle is the family's quiet heirloom, passed down, worn smooth, essential. As you sit beside the hearth, a child toddles over and hands you a small lump of dry moss tied with a cord. The mother laughs softly. The moss is not part of the fire ritual. It is merely a charm this child believes brings luck to the embers, an idea taught by a grandmother who enjoys keeping folk tales alive. You smile and gently place the charm near the hearth for the child's satisfaction. You lean closer to the fire and notice how the embers throb with life beneath the ash. Their glow pulses in slow movements, almost like breathing. You hold your hand just above them. The warmth rising from the hearth is faint but steady, enough to heat fingers, enough to keep the cottage slightly above freezing through the first hours of the night. The woman tells you something commonly mentioned in studies of medieval rural life. Firewood was precious, especially in colder regions. Villagers planned their winter fuel months ahead, often gathering wood throughout the year or trading for bundles when forests grew thin. Banking the fire was not simply convenience, it was survival. Fire-starting tools were slow, tedious, and unreliable. Embers were far more dependable. You shift your weight as the man demonstrates one final step. He gently drags a thick, charred stick across the hearth floor to arrange the remaining embers into a tight cluster before covering them. The ash settles with a soft hiss. He taps the hearthstone lightly, listening for the muffled crackling beneath the ash, confirming the coals are still alive. The room begins to cool as the fire quiets. You feel it almost immediately. The difference between a living flame and a buried ember is dramatic. The air becomes heavier, colder. Sharp drafts roam the corners of the room like restless shadows. The family does not seem disturbed by this. They begin to gather their blankets, preparing for bed. But before they settle, the man takes a long iron poker and touches it to the ash in 3 spots. You watch. The gesture carries quiet reverence, almost like a prayer. He tells you it is a family habit, not a village tradition. His father believed that marking the ash in 3 places helped distribute heat more evenly beneath the layer. No one knows if it truly works, but the family has kept the ritual alive. You stand and walk around the cottage, noticing how the room cools quickly. The windows whistle softly as the wind pushes through small gaps. The floor is cold beneath your boots. You understand why families hurry to bed after banking the fire. The hearth no longer warms the room. Its only job now is to survive the night. As you explore further, the oldest daughter lights a tiny rushlight from the last remaining flame before it disappears under ash. The small flame flickers brightly for a moment, then steadies. The rushlight becomes their final glow for bedtime tasks. She carries it across the room, illuminating shadows that gather behind tools and baskets. She pauses near a stack of chopped firewood and tells you something people in this region often believe. Cold embers with no living flame are considered unlucky to touch before sunrise. Old sayings insist that disturbing them brings bad weather. Whether this belief emerged from superstition or practical wisdom is unclear. Perhaps it was a way to keep curious hands away from dangerous coals at night. The girl sets the rushlight near her family's sleeping corner and pulls thick blankets over the straw bedding. She spreads old cloaks over the top and tucks in their edges with quick, efficient movements. 2 small dogs curl near the foot of the bed, their bodies already radiating warmth as they nestle into the straw. The woman folds her hands and tells you a curious detail from local memory. Some families used to sprinkle a pinch of dried herbs on the embers before banking them, hoping the scent would linger faintly through the night. She says the smell might not have lasted long, but it comforted people during the darkest nights. You imagine a faint trail of rosemary or sage drifting through a cold room. The room darkens as the rushlight burns lower. The family settles into their bed with soft shuffles and gentle whispers. The man pulls a wool blanket to his chin. The dogs stretch in sleepy contentment. The embers beneath the ash emit a faint glow, pulsing gently as if listening to the quiet. You step closer to the hearth one last time. The woman lifts a small piece of charcoal with tongs and places it near the center of the buried cluster. Her movements remain calm and careful. She explains that she places an extra coal there on nights colder than usual. She nods toward the shutter gaps that rattle with wind, adding that tonight needs every bit of heat. You watch as she smooths the ash one final time. The hearth becomes a small mound of white powder hiding its vital heart. You feel the warmth fading into the room's chill, like a sigh dissolving into silence. When you step outside, the cold night greets you again, yet you feel something different. You have just witnessed a quiet ritual that kept countless families alive for centuries. A ritual built on patience, trust, and intimate knowledge of fire. You take a long breath and walk forward through the snow. The embers behind you continue their slow, glowing work. Ahead lies more winter wisdom waiting to be discovered. You move on through the frozen night, your breath drifting upward in long, pale strands as you make your way toward another cluster of cottages. The cold presses harder now, as if midnight has sharpened its teeth. You wrap your arms around yourself and let your thoughts wander to how deeply winter dictates daily life here. It affects not only sleep, warmth, and shelter, but also the subtler rhythms of the body. You soon learn that medieval people understood this truth instinctively. They knew that surviving brutal nights depended not only on fires or blankets, but also on what they put into their stomachs before crawling under the covers. You reach the next cottage and smell something rich and comforting drifting through its walls. A scent of meat, fat, roasted oats, perhaps a hint of onion. Your stomach tightens with hunger. You push the door open and step inside, greeted instantly by a wave of warm, savory air. A family gathers around a wooden table. A pot sits near the hearth, its sides glistening faintly with grease. A woman ladles steaming stew into small bowls, each portion topped with a glimmering layer of fat that has not yet solidified. The man of the house gestures for you to join them. The family shifts closer together, making room for you at the table. You sit, feeling the heat rise from the pot. Steam curls into the air, carrying aromas that seem almost unreal after breathing frozen air for so long. The woman explains that they always eat something hearty before sleeping on winter nights. The cold drains energy quickly. A full stomach protects the body from losing heat too fast. You watch as she dips the ladle again, this time lifting a thicker mixture from the bottom of the pot. It contains barley, bits of salted pork, and small chunks of root vegetables grown in their garden before the frost set in. The food looks simple, but it feels luxurious in the context of a winter night. She hands you a bowl. You cradle it between your palms, letting the heat seep into your fingers. The warmth feels like a small miracle. You lift it to your lips and taste the thick, fatty broth. It coats your tongue with richness and clings to the back of your throat as you swallow. The sensation is immediate, comforting, grounding. The family watches you expectantly, hoping you might enjoy their humble meal, and when you smile, their faces brighten. The father explains that food like this is not only nourishment, but preparation for sleep. Fatty meals warm the body from the inside. Oats, barley, and meat provide slow-burning energy that lasts through the coldest hours. Modern science explains why this works, but medieval people discovered the truth through experience. A warm, full belly is a shield against the night. He adds that when the family is fortunate enough to have butter or suet, they mix it into their evening pottage. Even a spoonful helps. You glance at the pot and notice droplets of golden fat shimmering on the surface. The mother ladles more stew into her children's bowls, encouraging them to finish every last scrap. One of the older boys explains that they sometimes add dried peas to the pottage, especially on nights when the wind rattles the shutters with extra force. He leans across the table and grins, saying that peas stick to your ribs and keep you warm even if the fire dies. You laugh with him, the playful comment blending easily with the warm atmosphere. The mother offers you a small bowl filled with something darker. When you peer inside, you see small chunks of preserved meat and a thick glaze of rendered fat. She explains that this is winter stock, kept in the coldest corner of the cottage. The family eats it sparingly because it must last many nights. It tastes strong, salty, and dense with nutrients. She shares a detail that rural families often repeated among themselves. They believed that eating fatty foods before sleep made dreams more stable and restful. Whether this superstition has roots in biology or imagination does not matter. It brought comfort to people during long, icy nights. As you eat, you notice a small pot near the hearth filled with something else. It simmers slowly, barely bubbling. The father explains that it is a tonic made by boiling herbs like nettle, elderberry, and yarrow. Some villagers drink it before bed to ward off the winter shivers. He hands you a small wooden cup. The liquid smells sharp with herbs and faintly bitter. You take a sip. It warms your throat immediately, spreading heat into your chest. The effect feels soothing, like a soft breath unfolding inside you. A girl sitting across the table tells you that her grandmother insists this tonic keeps frost from settling too deeply into the bones. She shrugs, unsure if the old saying holds truth, but she drinks it anyway because it tastes like family tradition. Her grandmother says, "Winter respects those who respect their food." The father nods and adds another piece of local wisdom. Heavy meals help villagers sleep longer, and long sleep helps them avoid hourly exposure to the cold. The less they have to wake for hunger, the less they must brave the freezing air inside the cottage. You remember walking into homes earlier tonight and feeling how quickly heat escapes once fires dim. A long sleep is more than rest. It is preservation. He tells you that villagers often share advice on winter diet within the community. Some families reheat leftover fat in small pots and add it to bread or even smear it directly onto crusts to make them more sustaining. Others mix dried fruit, when available, into porridge to increase its warmth and sweetness. You imagine the comfort a simple bowl of warm porridge brings to children huddled in wool blankets during long nights. The mother leans in and mentions a small dispute that sometimes arises in conversations about winter practices. Some argue that eating heavy meals before bed leads to sluggish mornings. Others believe that slow mornings are worthwhile if they allow the body to survive the cold. Neither side claims victory. It is simply one of the many winter discussions that fill the dark nights. The family finishes their meal and stacks their bowls neatly. The children begin preparing their bedding, moving toward the warmest corner of the room. You help them shake out a wool blanket. As you lift it, you smell the faint aroma of herbs, likely added to the fabric during washing. The scent comforts you unexpectedly. You look back at the pot on the hearth. The stew inside now thickens as it cools. The mother places a wooden lid on top to preserve whatever remains. She tells you that tomorrow morning the stew will be warmed again with fresh water, and whatever they ate tonight will strengthen the new batch. Nothing is wasted in winter. Every scrap becomes a new meal. For a moment, the room falls quiet. The fire softens into a low glow. The children curl beneath their blankets. The parents adjust the hearth tools one last time. You realize how deeply food anchors them to the season. It fuels their bodies, their sleep, their rituals, and even their stories. When you step outside again, the cold meets you with familiar force, but you feel warmer. Not because the air has changed, but because you carry the memory of heat from inside. The rich stew, the herbal tonic, the laughter shared over dinner. These things follow you into the night like invisible embers. You walk on through the snow, feeling more grounded, more nourished, and more ready to learn how else the medieval world outsmarted winter. You leave the cottage with the rich stew still warming your stomach, and the cold outside feels slightly less cruel. Your breath trails behind you in slow plumes as you make your way toward another home. A faint fragrance drifts through the air. It is subtle, almost hidden beneath the scent of frost and wood smoke, but it grows stronger as you approach the next cottage. The smell is sweet, earthy, and comforting. You follow it like a thread until you reach a doorway with small bunches of dried plants hanging along the lintel. Someone has tied herbs here with thin twine, their shapes crisp from winter dryness. You open the door and step inside. Warm air, perfumed with herbs, wraps around you at once. The fragrance becomes fuller, rising from small bundles placed near the hearth, from bowls resting on shelves, and even from little cloth pouches tucked into pockets of the bedding. A woman stands near the fire crushing dried leaves in a wooden mortar. She looks up, wipes her hands on her apron, and invites you to come closer. You kneel beside her and inhale the blend of scents: lavender, chamomile, rosemary. Each one carries a slightly different personality, and together they create a cloud of calmness that makes you instantly relax. She explains that these herbs are not merely for pleasant smell, they help warm the body and ease the mind into restful sleep. Her voice is gentle, as though she knows these scents soothe not only the sick or exhausted, but anyone who braves the unforgiving cold outside. She takes a pinch of crushed chamomile and sprinkles it into a small cloth pouch. Then she ties the pouch shut with a practiced twist of her fingers. She hands it to you. The warmth of her hand has softened the herbs slightly, releasing an aroma that feels like soft blankets and quiet evenings. She says people tuck these pouches inside their clothes or under their pillows to help the night pass more comfortably. You examine the pouch and notice a faint golden powder clinging to the cloth. The fragrance grows stronger as it warms in your palm. She tells you that chamomile helps relax the muscles, while lavender calms the mind, and rosemary sharpens the breath on cold nights. The family believes these scents help them fall asleep faster, especially when the fire dies early and the cold presses into the house. The woman leads you to the family's sleeping area. Thick blankets lie folded at the foot of the bed, and beneath the top layer, a patchwork of tiny herb sachets is arranged neatly across the bedding. Some are tied with green thread, some with faded red string. She gently lifts one to show you how the herbs crumble slightly when pressed, releasing warm fragrances that drift into the air while people sleep. She explains a detail often mentioned in accounts of medieval household life. Herbs played a significant role in managing winter discomfort. People used them not only in cooking or healing but also in daily routines that involved warmth and rest. She says the scent of lavender, especially, lingers for hours when trapped beneath blankets. The sweetness settles into the straw mattress and becomes part of the family's winter memory. A child wanders over with a small bundle of dried mint leaves. He plops them into your hand and grins mischievously. His mother laughs and tells you that mint is their little secret for nights when the air feels heavy. When crushed, it releases a sharp, energizing scent that wakes the senses, making cold nights less suffocating. The boy leans close and whispers that he sometimes hides mint under his brother's pillow to prank him. The scent startles the brother awake, and he always blames imaginary spirits. You laugh, amused by the simple mischief. In a world shaped by cold and necessity, small jokes like that must brighten the long nights. You move closer to the hearth. A pot sits bubbling quietly with a mixture that smells both woody and sweet. The woman stirs it with a wooden spoon, explaining that this is an herbal brew meant for drinking before sleep. She ladles some into a cup and hands it to you. The liquid is warm and slightly bitter, with hints of honey softening its edges. As it slides down your throat, warmth blooms in your chest like a slow sunrise. She tells you that this brew is made from winter herbs dried in late autumn. Some villagers make stronger versions for those suffering from chills or lingering coughs. A neighbor once mixed thyme, sage, and horseradish into a single pot, creating a drink so potent that no one could decide whether it was medicine or punishment. As the family prepares their bedding, the father steps inside from the cold, carrying a small bundle of dried plants he collected earlier in the day. He shakes loose the snowflakes clinging to them and spreads them near the fire to dry. He tells you that he prefers to gather herbs personally because each plant carries its own quirks. Some dry faster, some release stronger scents, some crumble too easily. His method involves testing everything until he knows which plants will help the family on which nights. He adds a curious comment that reflects a subtle wisdom passed down across generations. Certain herbs behave differently in deep winter than in autumn or spring. He believes the cold strengthens their aroma, sealing the oils inside until they are warmed. Whether this is scientifically true or not, you can see why families continue to believe it. The mother invites you to help arrange the sleeping area. Together you lift the blankets and sprinkle a few dried petals between the layers. The petals crackle quietly as they settle. The children giggle, pretending the petals are magical flakes that ward off nightmares. You smile, appreciating the mixture of practicality and imagination that fills this home. Once the bedding is arranged, the parents show you one more practice. They take a small clay bowl filled with smouldering herbs and carry it across the room. The herbs release a soft stream of fragrant smoke that drifts like a gentle fog. They walk slowly, letting the smoke circulate. It creates a warm, comforting haze that settles in the air and clings to the walls. The father says this cleansing ritual keeps sickness away and adds a layer of warmth to the cottage. The idea fascinates you, not because the smoke truly heats the room, but because it transforms the atmosphere into something intimate and protected. He leans closer and shares a scholarly question that often arises in discussions of medieval herbal practices. Some researchers think these rituals served mostly practical purposes like masking smells or repelling insects. Others believe the rituals also carried emotional importance, helping families feel less vulnerable during the darkest nights. No definite answer exists, since written sources vary. Yet when you stand here, breathing in the smoky fragrance, it feels entirely reasonable that both explanations might be true. The little boy with the mint bundle tugs your sleeve and leads you to the window. Frost patterns lace the glass, forming delicate shapes like feathers and vines. He presses his palm to the frost, then quickly pulls it back with a laugh. His breath fogs the glass, leaving a small round patch of warmth. You mimic the action and feel the cold sting your skin. You both laugh quietly, sharing a moment of simple joy. As the night deepens, the family prepares to sleep. The parents settle beneath the thick blankets. The children climb in beside them. The herb sachets release their perfumes, filling the tiny room with a dreamy calm. The fire dims, but the air remains fragrant and warm in spirit, even if the temperature drops. You stand for a moment soaking in the harmony of the scene. The room faintly glows with the last embers of the fire. The scent of lavender and chamomile lingers like a soft sigh. You feel yourself relax just by standing here. When you finally step outside again, the cold rushes to greet you, eager as always. But you carry the warmth of herbs in your senses, a warm pocket of memory that seems to shield your thoughts from the freezing air. You walk forward, ready to discover what other secrets the winter night still hides. You continue through the sleeping village with the scent of herbs still lingering in your clothing. The cold presses against you, insistent and needling, but now you understand why every cottage you have visited so far feels layered with its own kind of warmth. Some homes rely on straw, some on wool, some on clever architecture, others on fragrant sleep aids. Yet there is another layer of winter survival you have not seen closely, something so simple and universal that it touches every family regardless of wealth: the clothing they sleep in. You walk toward a modest cottage lit by a faint, wavering glow. Inside, the fire is nearly gone, just a stub of light flickering like a sleepy heartbeat. The room is chilly, but not lifeless. A woman sits on a wooden stool near the hearth, holding a linen nightshirt in her lap. She sews a patch onto one shoulder using slow, careful stitches. When she notices you, she smiles with tired warmth and invites you to sit near her. The nightshirt looks worn and softened by many winters. You touch the fabric lightly. It is coarse, but surprisingly pliable. Linen breathes well, she explains, and though it is not the warmest cloth on its own, it works beautifully when layered beneath wool. She lifts a thick woolen over-tunic and lays it beside the linen garment. Together they form the sleeping outfit her husband will wear tonight. She tells you that winter nightclothes are as important as blankets. Medieval people needed layers that trapped heat close to their bodies, but did not suffocate them. She shakes out the woolen over-tunic, revealing faint marks where it has been stitched and restitched through the years. Threadbare patches have been reinforced with scraps of cloth. Every piece tells a story of past winters. You reach for the tunic and feel the texture between your fingers. It is heavy. The wool has a slight sheen from lanolin. Its thickness promises warmth. The woman explains that they rarely wash these garments in winter because the natural oils help repel moisture and hold heat better. She chuckles, adding that smell becomes less of a concern when survival takes center stage. Her daughter enters the room, wearing a nightcap tied neatly under her chin. The cap is made of wool, with a linen lining on the inside. She adjusts it shyly and tells you the cap keeps heat from escaping the head. Without it, she wakes up cold no matter how many blankets she uses. You nod, realizing how much body heat rises and how easily it escapes into the air without protection. The girl holds out a second cap for you to examine. The fabric is soft where it touches the forehead but rougher on the outside. It has been mended several times. The mother says caps like this were essential, even in wealthier homes. Some were decorated with embroidery or trimmed with finer fabrics, especially among the upper classes. Here, though, practicality rules. The father soon enters from a small adjoining room, pulling at the sleeves of a long linen shirt he has just put on. Over it he wears a woolen jerkin that seems almost too thick for sleep. But he tells you that nights like this demand protection from the cold. The jerkin traps warmth close to his core. He ties it snugly with a cord around his waist. He chuckles and shows you the long woolen stockings he wears to bed. They reach almost to his thighs and are fastened by simple garters. Without them, he says, his legs ache from the cold by dawn. You run your fingers across the stockings. The knit is tight, dense, and slightly scratchy. But that scratchiness is part of their charm, he adds. It reminds him he is warm and alive on winter nights. The mother picks up a small bundle of cloth from a bench and unfolds it. Inside are gloves, thin linen gloves, worn under heavier wool mittens. She explains that she sleeps with the linen pair only, while her husband sometimes adds the wool layer if the wind is fierce. Fingers grow stiff easily in winter, and once stiff, they lose heat faster. Protecting them at night helps avoid painful mornings when work must begin early. You watch the family move through their nighttime ritual. Layer by layer, they prepare their bodies for sleep, just as earlier families prepared their bedding or their herbs. Each garment has a purpose. Each layer works with the others. The father sits by the hearth and adjusts a second layer of wool around his shoulders. The firelight glimmers against the fabric. He tells you something commonly noted in medieval writings. People often slept in the same clothes they wore during the day, because changing garments in cold weather invited chills. But when it came to true winter nights, specific sleep garments became precious. They helped maintain warmth without wearing out daily clothes too quickly. You touch the edge of one of the woolen garments again, feeling the ridged weave pattern under your fingertips. Wool catches warmth so quickly. Even a few minutes near the hearth makes it feel alive with heat. You think back to the furs and quilts you saw earlier, realizing how crucial fabric is when fire grows tired and the night deepens. The little girl pulls a pair of soft socks from a shelf and shows them to you proudly. They are made from thick scraps of wool and lined with a bit of rabbit fur at the toes. She explains that her grandmother crafted them and promised they would keep her feet warm even on the longest nights. She wiggles her toes as if demonstrating their power. You smile, touched by the small moment of childish pride. The mother lights a tiny tallow candle, barely more than a stub, and carries it toward the bed. She sets it on a low shelf and lets its flickering glow reveal the sleeping space. The bed is covered with 2 layers of blankets, each carefully arranged. She places woolen nightshawls along the head of the bed for extra warmth, should someone wake shivering. The father steps beside you and shares a thought that many families in this region agree on. Good night clothes save more warmth than a weak fire. Fire warms a room, but clothing warms the person directly. On the harshest nights, wind can steal heat from the very air, but clothing clings tightly to the body, serving as the final defense. He then describes a lingering question often discussed by those who study medieval daily life. Did most people wear multiple layers to bed every night in winter, or only during extreme cold. Some argue that thick layers were a constant need. Others suggest families adapted based on how much fuel they had for the fire or how drafty their homes were. He shrugs, admitting that people did whatever kept them alive. Practices likely shifted from village to village, or even from family to family. As the family prepares to lie down, the mother arranges their sleeping garments one last time. She tucks the children into their separate woolen layers before pulling blankets over them. The daughter snuggles into her cap and lets out a contented sigh. The father crawls under the blankets with deliberate slowness so he does not let cold air slip inside. He pats the space beside him and jokes that his jerkin makes him feel like a walking furnace. His wife laughs quietly and settles beside him, adjusting her own layers. You stand and absorb the peaceful moment. Their garments whisper softly against the blankets, each layer working together to turn an icy night into bearable warmth. You realize how much these clothes mean to them. They are not luxuries. They are survival tools, shaped by years of tradition and necessity. Outside, the cold waits, but in here, wool, linen, and careful layering stand firm. You give the family a gentle nod and step out into the night once more. The wind greets you sharply, but your mind carries the warmth of thick stockings, nightcaps, and patched wool tunics. Each cottage teaches you something new. Each family reveals another piece of winter wisdom. And there are still many lessons ahead. You step back into the night, the wind slipping cold fingers around your neck the moment the door closes behind you. Yet instead of shrinking from it, you inhale the crisp air and let it wake your senses again. You have seen so many families wrapped in wool, clustered near hearths, or cocooned behind curtains. Now you wonder what happens to the homes themselves. Walls, roofs, floors, shutters. How did people keep the frigid world from leaking inside every crack? You follow this question as you walk across the snow, guided by a faint light shining through the seams of a wider, sturdier cottage. When you approach, you notice something leaning against the outer walls. Bundles of dried rushes, piles of daub, small buckets of clay mixed with straw. The cottage looks like a work in progress, even in deep winter. You knock softly and step inside when a voice invites you in. The warmth inside is faint but steady, and the air smells of fresh earth, smoke, and wool. A man kneels near the wall with a small wooden spatula, pressing damp daub into a narrow crack that runs between two timber beams. His wife stands nearby with a bucket of clay mixture, handing him handfuls of the material as he works. You watch them patch the wall with a practiced rhythm. The man glances at you and smiles, inviting you closer. He explains that winter becomes a constant battle against drafts. Even the tiniest gaps let in icy air that slips across floors like a warning. To fight this, families reinforce their walls and floors every winter with whatever they have: daub, moss, straw, clay, wool strips, even old rags. Anything that traps heat and blocks wind becomes part of the home. You touch the wall where he has just pressed fresh daub. It feels cold but dense, sealing the seam tightly. The woman tells you that houses made from wattle and daub shift slightly through the seasons. Heat expands the wooden frame in summer, and winter tightens it until tiny cracks appear. She gestures to one corner of the room where wind used to whistle through during storms. They sealed that corner earlier in the day with a mixture of clay and chopped straw, creating a patch that looks slightly darker than the rest of the wall. A child scurries past you, dragging a handful of moss. He stuffs it into a small gap near the base of the wall, patting it proudly. His father laughs and ruffles his hair, saying the boy has become an expert at spotting drafts. You crouch near the patched gap and feel how effectively the moss stops the cold from creeping in. It is soft, flexible, and easy to pack tightly. Nature becomes part of their architecture. The woman invites you to look at the floor. It is covered with woven rushes that create a springy mat beneath your feet. She explains that rushes protect the feet from the cold ground and help trap warmth in the lower parts of the house. They must be replaced often because moisture and dirt settle into them quickly. She grabs a handful and shows you how they plated the stalks into a flattened mat. The texture is rough, but warmer than bare earth or wood. She mentions a long-accepted detail among those who study medieval homes. Rushes acted as insulation as well as flooring, especially in winter. People sometimes sprinkled herbs or dried flowers among them to mask smells and freshen the air. The idea of sleeping above a soft layer of woven plants makes you appreciate how medieval life relied on simple, natural materials in clever ways. You look toward the ceiling. Thick wooden beams cross overhead, their surfaces aged by smoke and frost. The man explains that roofs often let in cold air when the wind rises, especially when thatch grows old. To fix this, families climb into the loft to press straw into gaps or hang cloth beneath drafty spots. He points to the loft ladder and encourages you to climb. You ascend slowly, feeling the temperature shift. The loft is cooler than the main room, but it is also lined with layers of straw packed so tightly that the air feels still. You run your hand across the straw. It is dry and brittle, but effective. It absorbs sound and heat, becoming a buffer against the winter night. The man joins you and shows how he uses long sticks to push the straw deeper into the edges of the roof. He explains that this prevents wind from slipping through the thatch and chilling the room below. You listen to him describe a time when a storm tore part of the thatch away and left the family freezing for days until neighbors helped repair it. Community effort often saved families in winter. Roof repairs were never done alone. Descending back into the main room, you notice a small shelf near the window. The shutters are reinforced with thick cloth strips woven through wooden slats. The cloth flutters slightly as wind presses from outside. The woman beams proudly as she explains that layering cloth across window shutters keeps frost from forming too thickly on the inside. If frost builds up too quickly, it can melt when the fire warms and drip onto the rushes, creating damp patches that make the cold even worse. She lifts one of the cloth layers and reveals straw tucked into the cracks between the shutters. Another small layer of insulation. You place your palm near the shutter and feel the difference. It is colder than the wall, but warmer than the outside. Every small enhancement matters on nights like this. The man now gestures toward the hearth. The fire is low, but the stones surrounding it glow with faint warmth. He explains that he and his wife stacked these stones along the hearth, not just for cooking, but for heat retention. Stones hold warmth long after flames fade. They turn into slow, steady radiators. He taps one gently, and it emits a soft heat, even though the fire is little more than a glow. A young girl enters the room carrying a basket of old wool scraps. She sets it down beside her mother, who begins stuffing the scraps into thin gaps along the door frame. You help press the wool into place with your fingertips. It holds firmly, forming a tight seal. The girl looks at you proudly, announcing that she helped gather these scraps from old clothing that could no longer be mended. The mother nods and shares a small household belief. Some families say that wool scraps placed in wall cracks last longer if blessed during winter festivities. Whether this is superstition or tradition, she does not care. She likes the idea that something joyful lingers in the walls through the darkest months. As the family continues their tasks, the father tells you there is a question often discussed among people who study historical building techniques. Did most families reinforce their homes every winter, or did only a few manage these improvements consistently? Some believe constant reinforcement was common. Others think many families lacked the materials or energy to maintain their homes this carefully. He says it likely depended on weather patterns and household strength. Some winters demanded far more work than others. You begin to understand that weatherproofing a medieval home was not a single chore but a season-long project. Every day brought new cracks, new chills, new patches to fix. Cold finds ways in. People find ways to keep it out. The family finally finishes their evening repairs. The father rubs his hands together near the hearth, letting the faint warmth settle into his skin. The mother folds the extra daub neatly, storing it beside the wall for tomorrow. The children curl near the warmest corner of the room, giggling quietly as they play with wool scraps. You look around one last time and appreciate how every inch of this cottage reflects their effort. The patched walls, the stuffed shutters, the carefully placed rushes, the straw-packed loft. So many tiny defences against the cold, none perfect on their own but powerful together. When you step outside again, the cold presses against you more sharply than before, as if angry you escaped its reach inside the cottage. But your mind carries the memory of warm stones, thick daub, and wool-stuffed gaps. You walk forward into the night, eager to discover what other winter wisdom waits in the sleeping village. You push forward into the winter dark, your boots sinking deeper into the snow as the wind sweeps past you with a low, moaning voice. The night feels colder now, as if each hour that passes tightens the grip of frost on the village. Even your breath seems to freeze mid-air before fading into the dark. You keep moving, drawn by a soft glow ahead. It is not the wide radiance of a hearth or the scattered light of rushlights. It is smaller, sharper, more deliberate. You follow it to a cottage positioned slightly higher on a slope, where smoke curls upward in thin ribbons. When you step inside, you immediately notice a small iron object sitting on a stool near the hearth. It looks like a shallow metal pan with a long wooden handle attached. A woman crouches beside it, holding a pair of tongs. The smell of warm iron drifts toward you. She lifts the pan and slides it carefully under the blankets on her bed. The bed rustles in response, releasing a faint wave of heated air. You realize you are watching one of the oldest winter remedies for icy bedding, the bed warmer. She pulls the pan back out and shows it to you. Inside are glowing coals that flicker gently like sleepy fireflies. She explains that they scoop hot coals from the hearth, place them inside the pan, close the lid, and slide the apparatus beneath the blankets to warm the bedding before sleep. It sounds simple, but the process requires skill. Too many coals and the blankets scorch. Too few, and the bed stays cold. She points to dark marks on the pan where coals once burned too bright. They learn from that incident and now treat the tool with caution. Her husband enters the room, holding another bed warmer with a dent in its side. He jokes that the dent came from a time he dropped it in surprise when a coal popped unexpectedly. He sets the pan down and adds a fresh layer of hot embers. You watch the steam rise from the metal. The warmth feels like a small sun between your hands. The woman smiles and says that warming pans are not common in poorer households because iron is costly. Those who cannot afford one sometimes heat smooth stones instead, rolling them near the fire until they grow hot and placing them at the foot of the bed. She shows you a basket of rounded stones sitting near the hearth. They are darkened from years of heating and cooling cycles. You pick one up carefully. It is warm, not burning, like holding a puff of sunlight. You understand why these stones became winter companions for families who lacked expensive tools. She takes one stone and wraps it in a scrap of wool cloth. The cloth protects the bed from scorching and helps keep the heat longer. She tucks the bundle into the foot of the bed, patting it gently. This small gesture adds a layer of comfort that could mean everything on nights when the fire dwindles before morning. As she works, she tells you something often noted in descriptions of medieval sleeping habits. People believed warmth at the feet helped the entire body relax into sleep more easily. Cold feet, on the other hand, were thought to disturb dreams and make the night feel longer. You imagine lying down on a winter night without any warmth near your toes. Even now, with your boots and layered clothing, your feet feel numb from the cold outside. The husband demonstrates how they move the warmer across the bed in slow motions. He slides the pan along the sheets, creating a warm path beneath the covers. The fabric rises slightly as heated air spreads. You feel tempted to slip your hand under the blanket to test the warmth, but he laughs and warns you that some spots might still be too hot. He explains a detail often mentioned in household accounts. Bed warmers must be moved constantly to avoid scorching linens. Linen is durable, but vulnerable to live heat. His grandmother burned a hole clean through a treasured sheet once, leaving a perfect round mark that the family joked about for years. The couple invites you to sit on a bench near the bed while they continue warming it. The husband places the pan back on the stool for a moment and lifts a wooden frame from under the bed. He shows you that they use this frame to support thicker blankets above the warming pan when they want to heat the bed more thoroughly without pressing the hot metal directly against the fabric. You admire the practical ingenuity of the setup. As he demonstrates, he mentions a question that often comes up among people who study old domestic tools. Did most households use warming pans regularly, or were they mainly a treat for wealthier families in rural areas? Some believe warming pans were more widespread than records suggest because they passed quietly through generations. Others argue they were rare outside of well-supplied homes. The husband shrugs. He says in this region, families used whatever method kept them alive. If one house had a tool, neighbors shared it whenever they could. You stand and walk to the hearth, drawn by the glow. The fire is low but still alive, its flames curling gently around charred logs. The woman kneels beside you and shows you the coal shovel they use to transfer embers to the warming pans. Its handle is wrapped in cloth to protect hands from the heat. She taps the shovel lightly and says that the process of gathering coals is almost an art. You must choose pieces that still glow but are not too fiery. Only experience teaches that balance. She picks up a handful of herbs from a small bowl near the hearth. Rosemary, thyme, and dried apple peels. She sprinkles a little onto the coals before closing the warming pan's lid. The herbs crackle subtly, releasing sweet, smoky scents. She explains that some families add herbs to make their beds smell pleasant or to create a calming atmosphere for sleep. You inhale the fragrance. It carries softness, like memories of warmer months hiding inside winter tools. The couple now work together to finish warming their bed. They rotate the pan inside the blankets, fold the quilt over it, and then move it aside to let the warmth settle. The bed looks inviting now, its woolen surface touched with gentle heat. The woman gestures for you to test the warmth with your hand. You slide your fingers between the blankets. The heat envelops you instantly. It feels like slipping into a pocket of safety carved out of the cold night. For a moment, you imagine pulling the blankets up to your chin, letting the warmth cradle you while winter prowls outside. A young boy enters the room carrying a small clay jug. He sets it near the hearth and smiles shyly at you. The jug contains warm water meant for warming hands or splashing lightly on cold faces before bed. His mother pats his hair and praises his helpfulness. You see how every family member contributes to preparing for the night. The father folds the blankets neatly, smoothing out any remaining cool patches. He tells you that while warming pans are wonderful tools, they must be used carefully. Several winters ago, a neighbor fell asleep before removing the warmer from the bed and woke to smoke rising from his sheets. Fortunately, the fire did not spread, but the memory serves as a warning in every household. The woman echoes his caution, saying that they never let the pan stay in one spot too long. They always move it evenly and remove it at least 10 minutes before lying down. Once removed, the bed holds the warmth well enough to lull even the coldest bones into rest. The family begins preparing for sleep. The children gather on the bed, giggling softly as they poke the warm blankets with their toes. The parents smile, their faces glowing in the firelight. You watch as the ritual of warmth transforms into a moment of simple happiness. You step back and observe the whole room, the flickering fire, the worn tools, the carefully handled bed warmer, the warm stones resting by the hearth. The air feels thick with shared effort. These winter rituals are small, but together they build a world where sleep becomes possible, even on the coldest nights. When you step outside again, the cold greets you sharply, but you hold on to the memory of warm metal, glowing coals, and blankets infused with gentle heat. You walk forward into the snow, knowing the night still holds many lessons in surviving the deep winter. You continue along the fading trail of footprints through the snow, your breath forming slow clouds as you walk past the last line of cottages. The village grows quiet behind you. Ahead stands a low stone building with tall, narrow windows that gleam faintly in the moonlight. You recognize it instantly. a monastery on the edge of the settlement. Its shape rises like a quiet guardian in the night, solemn and unmoving. You draw nearer, sensing this place will teach you something different about winter sleep. When you approach the wooden door, a soft chant drifts from within, low and steady, as if woven into the cold air. You push gently, and the hinges groan a little. Inside, you step into a hall, lit by a few candles whose flames flicker like thin golden threads. The stone floor chills your boots instantly. The air smells of wax, cold stone, and faint incense lingering from evening prayers. A monk in a simple wool robe approaches, hands folded, expression serene. He gestures for you to follow him through a narrow corridor. As you walk, the temperature drops even further. The stones seem to drink every trace of warmth from the air. You rub your arms instinctively, wondering how anyone sleeps in such conditions. He leads you into the dormitory. A long room with tightly spaced wooden beds stretches ahead, each one fitted with thin mattresses stuffed with straw. The blankets look modest, plain wool, patched and worn. The windows are small and unshuttered, allowing a faint line of moonlight to fall across the floor. You feel a cold breeze flow gently along the corridor of beds, creeping beneath your clothing. The monk tells you that members of the order sleep together in the same space not just for spiritual unity but also to share warmth. He points out how the beds are arranged close enough that each person benefits from the body heat of others, yet far enough to maintain discipline. You can sense how this design balances practicality and devotion. You kneel beside one of the beds. The straw mattress crinkles softly under your palm. It feels colder than any straw bed you have touched so far. The wool blanket is coarse and somewhat thin. You lift it, and the cold air seeping through the fibers brushes your skin. You realize these monks prioritize humility over comfort. They embrace cold as part of their path. As you explore the room, the monk explains that they are expected to wake several times during the night to pray. Fire is rarely allowed in the dormitory because warmth can encourage drowsiness, and drowsiness interferes with the strict schedule of worship. He says their discipline requires clarity of mind, even when the cold gnaws at their fingers and toes. He offers you a thoughtful detail often noted in monastic histories. Monks believed enduring physical hardship strengthened spiritual focus. Cold nights, thin clothing, and simple beds reminded them to detach from earthly pleasures. It was not merely discomfort, it was devotion in physical form. A younger monk passes by carrying a small clay cup filled with water. The surface of the water shivers lightly in the cold. He sets it beside his bed. The older monk points to it and says that on many nights the water freezes halfway through the dark hours. You imagine waking for prayer, dipping your fingers into icy water, and then returning to a bed that hardly warms your skin. The discipline required feels immense. You walk farther along the dormitory. The room is silent except for faint creaks of wood responding to the temperature. The air holds a stillness that almost vibrates. You touch a wall and feel frost forming in tiny crystals along the stone. It sparkles like a thin veil of stars captured indoors. A monk approaches you with a lantern. Its dim glow softens the edges of the room. He explains that their wool robes double as sleeping garments. They rarely change before bed. Instead, they sleep in the same robes they wear during daily duties. You touch the robe fabric. It is heavy but rough, scented with smoke and earth. It has none of the softness found in wealthier households. Yet it feels sturdy, built for endurance. He shares a small piece of monastery lore. During especially severe winters, monks sometimes slept with their hands tucked into their sleeves and their feet wrapped in spare cloth scraps. The scraps often came from torn habits or old prayer cloths. He chuckles quietly, admitting the practice was not elegant, but it prevented frostbite on the coldest nights. A bell chimes softly in a distant room. The monk lifts his head. He tells you the sound marks the time for a brief midnight prayer. He leads you through another corridor, where the cold bites even harder. The floors grow uneven beneath your boots. The walls narrow. Then you enter a smaller chamber where several monks kneel on the stone floor, heads bowed. Their breaths fog the air with quiet devotion. The chant that rises from their voices fills the chamber like a soft tide. You feel warmth in their voices even if the air remains cold. When the prayer ends, they stand, bow slightly, and walk silently back toward the dormitory to rest again. One monk lingers and speaks to you softly. He explains something that scholars often discuss when studying monastic life. Some monasteries allowed heated rooms during extreme weather, while others insisted on cold as a spiritual test. Records vary widely. He shrugs gently, suggesting that each order shaped its rules according to belief, tradition, and local climate. He tells you his order believes winter refines patience and strengthens resolve. He takes you to a corner where a small wooden chest sits. Inside is a bundle of herbs, mostly thyme and mint. The monks burn these herbs occasionally to freshen the dormitory and ease breathing during the night. The scent is subtle but comforting. They never use strong herbs because they could distract the senses. Everything must support focus. You notice a few stone bricks arranged near the hearth in the adjoining common room. Unlike the cottages you visited earlier, this monastery uses the stones sparingly. The hearth burns only during communal gatherings or meals. At night, the embers are swept away, leaving the dormitory cold and quiet. The discipline humbles you. To sleep in such conditions requires strong will. A younger monk shows you a small trick they use to preserve warmth during especially brutal nights. They place a tightly sealed clay jug filled with warm water under the straw mattress. The warmth cannot escape easily, so it radiates upward in a gentle glow for a short time. It is a modest comfort, but meaningful when fire and warming tools are forbidden. He laughs softly and admits that some novices try to sneak warmer clothing into bed during their first winters, only to be gently corrected by senior monks. Rules are rules. Learning to endure the cold is part of their journey. You return to the main dormitory one last time. The monks lie under their wool blankets again, breathing slowly, fitting themselves into a rhythm that must carry them through the rest of the night. Their faces look peaceful, not because they are warm, but because they have accepted their routines fully. You stand quietly near the doorway, letting the cold sink into your bones. There is something humbling in this austerity. No curtains, no warming pans, no heavy feather beds, just faith, discipline, and a shared room where each breath becomes part of a communal struggle against the night. When you finally step outside, the cold hits you sharply, almost violently. But you understand something new. Not every form of warmth in winter comes from heat. Some comes from purpose. Some from structure. Some from belief. You breathe deeply and walk away from the monastery, ready to learn how wanderers and travelers survived the long winter roads beyond the village. You leave the monastery behind, the cold clinging to you as though reluctant to let such silence slip away. The snow crunches beneath your boots, each step echoing in the stillness. Ahead, the land opens into darker stretches of road where no lanterns shine. A weak moon casts a faint glow over ridges of frozen earth. You imagine how many travelers once crossed these same paths during winters far harsher than tonight's, wrapped in thin cloaks and praying for shelter before frost claimed their strength. You follow the road a little farther until you spot a dim lantern swinging beside a low wooden building. Its shape is wider than a cottage and lacks the decorative touches of a manor, an inn for travelers. The smoke drifting from its chimney rises lazily, softening into the sky like a sigh. You step closer. The wooden door rattles in the wind, but warm sounds reach you through the cracks. A muffled laugh, the scrape of a bench, the clink of a mug. When you enter, a breath of warm air meets you, mixed with the scents of ale, roasted oats, and damp wool drying near the hearth. A group of travelers huddle at a long table, cloaks steaming as they thaw. Their cheeks glow red, their boots drip melted snow onto the floor, and their hands tremble with exhaustion. A few glance up at you, offering tired but friendly nods. The innkeeper approaches, wiping his hands on a worn apron. He gestures toward the fire and encourages you to warm your fingers. You make your way to the hearth where thick logs burn with slow confidence. their flames curling upward with bright orange life. You stretch your hands toward the heat, savoring the sting of thawing skin. The innkeeper sets a clay mug beside you, hot ale, flavored with a pinch of ginger. You lift it to your lips, letting the warmth spill into your chest. It brings back strength you did not know you had lost. As you drink, the innkeeper explains that travelers often stagger into his inn half frozen during severe winters. Some arrive alone, some with animals, some in groups, drawn by whatever faint light guides them through the snow. You glance toward the far corner, where a wanderer lies wrapped in a thick cloak, limbs curled tightly, face half hidden beneath frayed fabric. A small firepot sits on the floor beside him. It is a clay pot filled with warm embers, covered with a perforated lid. The traveller uses it like a portable hearth, cradling it against his chest or setting it by his feet during sleep. The innkeeper tells you that these firepots are precious companions on winter roads. They glow for hours, offering enough heat to keep frost from settling into bones. Curious, you kneel beside the traveller's firepot. You place your hand near the small holes in the lid and feel gentle warmth escaping. The traveller shifts and lifts his cloak slightly. He smiles weakly and tells you he bought the pot from a merchant who claimed it would outlast 3 winters if handled well. Whether that promise is true or not, he cherishes it. It kept him alive last night when he slept in a half-collapsed barn miles from here. He explains that roadside barns and abandoned sheds often become makeshift shelters. People seek these spaces not because they are comfortable, but because they block the wind. Sometimes they share the building with animals. Sometimes with strangers they meet along the road. A single roof can mean the difference between waking up stiff but alive or not waking at all. You move across the room and sit near a pair of travellers who look younger. They wear thick wool cloaks and leather boots crusted with snow. The girl leans forward, warming her hands. The boy sits straight, warming his back against the fire. They tell you they have spent 2 nights on the road after visiting family in another village. Last night they took shelter in a ferry shed by the river. The ferryman had long since retired for the winter, but the shed remained unlocked, and they found bundles of straw stored inside. They piled the straw into a makeshift bed, layering their cloaks on top. The girl laughs softly as she recalls how the wind rattled the shed walls until midnight. She says she pretended the noise came from spirits knocking, but in truth she was grateful for any wooden barrier between them and the night. You see the relief in her eyes now as she sits near the warm hearth of the inn. The boy adds that travellers share everything in winter, not out of generosity alone but out of necessity. Food, blankets, firepots, information about shelter ahead. He says that on the frozen roads, kindness matters as much as skill. People trust strangers because cold makes everyone equal. The innkeeper returns carrying a tray of bread and cheese, offering you a portion. He tells you that in winter, inns never refuse a traveller. Even if beds are full, there is always room near the fire. When storms trap wanderers for days, the common room becomes a temporary community of exhausted people keeping one another awake and warm with stories and shared meals. You follow him to a narrow doorway that leads to the sleeping quarter for visitors. Inside, several travellers rest on raised wooden platforms lined with straw and wrapped in blankets provided by the inn. Some snore softly. Others sleep in silence, curled like cats seeking warmth. You notice something interesting. Most travellers sleep fully clothed. Cloaks remain wrapped around their bodies. Boots sit nearby, ready to be slipped on in seconds. The innkeeper explains that winter travellers rarely undress at night. They keep garments on to preserve warmth and stay prepared should they need to flee a collapsing roof or help shovel snow blocking the door. He shows you a stack of extra blankets stored in a chest. They are coarse wool, washed rarely, but dependable. He lifts one and places it over a sleeping man's shoulders. The gesture is gentle. You sense that this innkeeper has performed such acts countless times through countless winters. A young boy who works at the inn enters the room with a bucket of warm water. He places it near the sleeping platforms, explaining that travellers sometimes warm their hands or faces when they wake during cold spells. He says the bucket must stay inside the room during winter because leaving it near the door means the water will freeze within an hour. You return to the main hall as a gust of wind shakes the shutters. The innkeeper frowns and checks the door latch. The shutters rattle again, and he mutters that winter winds sometimes loosen hinges, and he must nail them tighter in the morning. You sense he has repeated this routine many times. He tells you a bit of remembered wisdom passed from one innkeeper to the next. Always bank the fire before dawn. Always keep a pot of warm ale on the hearth. Always store extra straw for unexpected guests. And never let a traveller wander away alone if the sky darkens with frost clouds. He shares a quiet thought often echoed in winter tales. Travellers carry stories from far places. In winter, those stories become part of the warmth. People listen not only for entertainment, but also for direction, for warnings, for hope. You think of the earlier wanderer and his small firepot glowing gently, like a signal of survival. As the night deepens, more travellers drift to the hearth. Some lean against benches, some sit on the floor, some simply close their eyes and listen to the crackling fire. The room feels thick with shared fatigue and shared safety. You step outside to breathe the cold again. The inn's lantern sways in the wind. Snow drifts softly at your feet. The world out here is still dangerous, but knowing that people find shelter in barns, ferry sheds, inns, or even beside warm beasts gives you a sense of how resilient humans have always been. You take another deep breath and continue walking, ready to learn how wealthier households prepared for winter nights beyond the common traveller's reach. You leave the traveller's inn behind, stepping once more into the cold night air that folds around you like a stiff cloak. Your breath drifts upward in pale spirals as you walk toward the manor grounds you glimpsed earlier from afar. The shape rises slowly from the darkness, larger than the cottages, quieter than the inn, and steadier than the monastery. A noble household sleeps differently from the villagers, and you feel curious to see how wealth changes the rhythm of a winter night. You cross a small wooden bridge that creaks beneath the weight of frozen planks. A torch burns near the manor gate, its flame struggling but persistent. The building ahead seems sombre and dignified, its stone walls thick and unmoving beneath the moonlight. When you approach the entrance, a servant wrapped in a fur-lined cloak nods to you and ushers you inside. Warmth greets you at once, not overwhelming like a roaring fire, but gentle and even, spread throughout the great chamber by careful design. The walls are lined with tapestries so thick you could lose your hand in the weave. One shows a hunting scene frozen in time. Another depicts a queen resting beside a tree, embroidered with exquisite detail. These tapestries do more than decorate. They trap warmth, soften drafts, and add layers of comfort to rooms that would otherwise feel as cold as stone tombs. A steward approaches, holding a candle holder carved from ivory. He gestures for you to follow him through a narrow corridor. As you walk, you notice carpets laid across the floor. They are woven tightly with wool dyed in deep reds and dark greens. Each step you take sinks lightly into softness. The steward explains that carpets, though expensive, help muffle wind sneaking through floorboards in older manors, especially during harsh winters. He adds that noble families prize these items not only for beauty but as barriers against icy air. He leads you into a private chamber, warm and dim, lit by a single chandelier of candles that drip wax onto brass plates. A noblewoman sits near the hearth, brushing her long hair while a maid folds thick blankets at the foot of the bed. The chamber feels layered with luxury. Soft furs draped over chairs, embroidered cushions stacked near the window, and a polished wooden chest filled with more linens. The noblewoman welcomes you with a gentle nod. She sets her brush aside and gestures toward her bed, inviting you to examine it. You walk closer and notice the bed is enormous, tall as your chest, with carved posts rising like pillars. Thick curtains surround it on all sides, drawn back for the moment. She explains that these bed curtains are made of heavy wool lined with fine linen. When pulled shut, they trap warmth so effectively that the air inside feels almost like a separate climate. She lifts a corner of the curtain for you to feel. The fabric is weighty, dense and smooth, where her hand has brushed it countless times. She says that when winter howls outside, she and her husband draw the curtains around them, leaving only a narrow gap for air. She smiles as she recalls nights when the wind screamed against the shutters, but the warmth inside the curtained bed kept them untouched. You notice a fur coverlet spread across the mattress. It glows faintly in the firelight, its texture rich and deep. The noblewoman tells you this fur came from foxes her grandfather hunted many seasons ago. The pelt still holds heat so well that even on bitter nights, it warms quickly beneath the body. She lifts one edge and drapes it lightly across your arm. The softness surprises you. It feels alive with comfort, even after all these years. The maid beside her finishes folding woolen blankets and opens a carved wooden chest to store them. Inside the chest lie layers of linen sheets, silk coverings, and fine quilts stitched with scenes of summer fields. The noblewoman laughs softly, saying that the summer imagery helps lift her spirits on cold nights. You imagine sleeping beneath a quilt embroidered with sunshine while winter growls outside. A psychological shield as much as a physical one. A man enters the room, wearing a robe trimmed with dark fur. He carries a brass vessel shaped like a small jug. He unscrews the lid and reveals heated stones inside, glowing faintly with captured warmth. The noblewoman explains they place these stones beneath the bed frame on the coldest nights, allowing warmth to rise through the mattress. She invites you to touch the vessel. The brass radiates gentle heat. You imagine how effective this would be in a room like this, where every surface has been prepared to retain warmth. He sets the vessel under the bed and then sits near the hearth. The fire burns low but steady. The logs are thick oak, expensive and slow burning. He tells you that noble estates require careful planning to ensure enough fuel for winter. Woodcutters gather logs in warmer seasons and stack them under covered sheds. The family always reserves the best logs for nighttime fires. His voice carries a tone of responsibility rather than pride. Heat in winter is a matter of preparation, even for the wealthy. He speaks about something often noted in household accounts from noble families: tapestries, carpets, fur-lined furnishings, and thick bedding were essential tools, not mere displays of status. Their purpose was comfort and survival. Noble homes used every advantage available to soften the harshness of winter. Yet even here, cold still crept in through cracks in stone walls and window frames. The noblewoman pours a small drink from a clay pot resting by the hearth. She offers some to you. It is warm spiced wine, flavored with cloves and cinnamon. The warmth spreads through your throat and into your chest like an ember. She tells you the drink helps relax the body before sleep. Spice is precious but healing, especially in winter. She takes a sip herself, closing her eyes briefly as the warmth settles into her bones. Her husband tells you that scholars sometimes debate how warm noble houses truly were in winter. Some argue these great chambers remained cold despite tapestries and fires. Others believe that with enough fuel, bedding, and heavy fabrics, noble families managed to create genuine warmth. He shrugs lightly. He says that even in luxury, there are nights when the wind sneaks its fingers through every gap, and all you can do is curl deeper under the blankets. The servant returns, carrying a warming cloth soaked in herbal water. He places it across the nobleman's feet before the couple climbs into bed. The cloth releases steam, carrying scents of rosemary and juniper. The noblewoman explains that warming the feet helps the entire body relax, echoing what villagers believe as well. As the hour grows late, the couple prepares to sleep. The maid pulls the bed curtains halfway closed, and you watch the interior darken into a soft shadow. The noblewoman climbs onto the tall mattress with practiced grace. Her husband follows, settling beside her. They pull the fur coverlet to their shoulders. The curtains fall the rest of the way, enclosing them in a cocoon of warmth and privacy. You step back, feeling the last ripples of heat drift from the fireplace toward your cheeks. The steward escorts you to the door and gives you a respectful nod. As you step outside, the cold sweeps around you like a wave, but you carry with you the memory of tapestries glowing in firelight, warm stones under a bed, and thick curtains falling into place like a sanctuary against the night. You continue your journey, ready to see how children weather the same cold that challenges adults at every turn. You walk away from the manor, letting the glow of its windows fade behind you until the world becomes quiet again, wrapped in the silver stillness of winter. The snow crunches beneath your boots in a slow rhythm as you follow a narrower path that winds past a frozen well and a line of bare trees. Their branches look like ink strokes against the moonlit sky. As you walk, you think about all the adults you have watched tonight, each fighting the cold with their own tools, rituals, and resilience. But you have not yet seen winter through the eyes of someone younger. Children live this same cold, but in their own ways. And in their world, the winter night feels larger, heavier, and sometimes more magical than it does to grown hearts. You spot a faint lantern swinging outside a small cottage at the far edge of the village. Its light wavers in the wind, soft and golden. You step closer and knock gently. A moment later, the door opens, letting out a puff of warm air mixed with the smell of wool, milk porridge, and something sweet like dried apples. A mother stands there, holding a bundle of cloth in her arms. She smiles tiredly and invites you inside. When you enter, you see 3 children preparing for bed, each in their own small way. One girl kneels near the hearth, rubbing her hands together and warming her fingers above the last flickers of fire. A younger boy sits on a stool, tugging wool socks onto his small feet with fierce determination. And the smallest child, a toddler with messy curls, waddles around clutching a blanket that trails behind like a tail. Their father sits at the table sharpening a small knife, not for work at this late hour, but for the comforting habit of keeping his hands busy. He looks up and nods kindly, gesturing for you to sit near the hearth. You lower yourself to the floor beside the children. The hard-packed earth beneath the rushes feels cold even through your layers. The girl at the hearth glances over her shoulder and tells you she is checking their little fire guardian. You follow her gaze to a small clay figure sitting near the hearthstones. Its round shape resembles a squatting animal, though the details have softened with years of handling. She says her grandmother told her the figurine protects the fire while the family sleeps. Whether the story is meant to comfort or distract from the cold, it clearly means something to her. The father chuckles and says the clay figure is simply a memento from his own childhood, but he never corrects the story. In winter, comfort matters more than accuracy. The mother lowers herself onto a stool and unwraps the bundle in her arms. Inside is a small wool nightcap, neatly sewn and lined with linen. She places it gently onto the toddler's head, then ties it under his chin. The toddler beams proudly and toddles toward the bed, tugging his blanket behind him. The older children begin arranging their sleeping space. Their bed is not one large shape, but a cluster of smaller ones pushed close together so they can share warmth throughout the night. You notice how the children naturally move toward one another. Their bodies gravitate toward warmth like magnets seeking contact. It is instinctive, ingrained since their earliest winters. The mother lifts a heavy wool blanket from a peg on the wall. Its surface is worn thin in places and patched in others, but it still holds warmth beautifully. She drapes it carefully across the children's bed. Underneath the blanket, layer upon layer of straw creates a soft, springy base that crinkles faintly as the children settle onto it. The eldest child pulls a small, flat stone from beneath her pillow. The stone glows faintly with residual warmth. She explains shyly that her father heated it by the fire earlier, then wrapped it in cloth so she could hold it while falling asleep. She presses it into her brother's hands and tells him he can sleep with it tonight. He grins proudly, hugging the warm stone to his chest. The father watches this exchange with a soft smile. He tells you that warm stones have always been a quiet bedtime gift among siblings in their family. The warmest stone goes to whoever completed the most chores that day, though sometimes generosity wins, and a child gives it to someone who cried or struggled or simply needed extra comfort. You ask the children how they manage winter nights. The older daughter answers first. She says they stay warm by pretending they are foxes curled in their den. She slips under the blanket and demonstrates how tightly she tucks her legs to her chest, creating a small pocket of heat. Her brother follows, but instead of curling like a fox, he stretches out dramatically and declares he is a hibernating bear. His sister rolls her eyes and pulls the blanket tighter around him anyway. The toddler struggles to climb onto the bed, so his mother lifts him and places him between his siblings. He giggles as he wiggles into the warm center. Children sleep closest to the warmest bodies, she explains. Their smaller frames lose heat faster, and they wake often if not well insulated by family or clothing. Her voice carries the calm certainty of someone who has spent many winters learning these truths firsthand. The father rises and shows you a small stack of cloth squares tied with twine. He unties one and reveals a layer of herbs, mostly mint and lavender, sewn into the cloth. These sachets were prepared during autumn. He places one near the children's heads, explaining that the scent comforts them and helps them relax. He says they used to give the children dolls made from scraps of cloth during the summer, but in winter, scent becomes a more reliable companion than toys. The mother adds that when the night grows dangerously cold, they burn a tiny pinch of dried chamomile and let the smoke swirl above the bed for a moment before opening a window shutter briefly to clear the air. It creates a warm, soothing moment before sleep settles in. She says too much smoke is harmful, but just a whisper of it calms anxious hearts. The father folds another blanket and drapes it across the children, tucking the edges beneath their sides. He leaves one corner loose so they can escape if they wake overheated. You watch his hands, steady and gentle. He pauses to adjust the toddler's cap, ensuring it covers his ears properly. The daughter asks her father for a bedtime story. He kneels beside the bed and begins speaking in a low, steady voice. He tells them a simple tale about a family of mice who survived a winter storm by huddling together beneath a fallen leaf. The children listen intently, their faces relaxed, their breaths slowing with each gentle word. The mother lights a small lantern and places it near the hearth to give the room a soft glow through the night. She says that children fear total darkness more than cold, so she leaves a faint light burning until the fire is low enough that the embers alone can guide wandering eyes. The father finishes the story and tucks the blanket one last time. The children now lie still, drifting into sleep. Their breaths rise in soft, uneven patterns. The toddler's hand clutches his sister's sleeve. The older brother mutters a sleepy farewell to the warm stone he still holds. The parents sit quietly for a moment, watching their children with the stillness that winter encourages. Their faces soften with tenderness and fatigue. You feel the warmth between them, a warmth not created by fire or stone or wool, but by presence. When you finally step outside again, the cold is sharp as broken glass, but something in you feels brighter. You carry the memory of a family clustered together, blankets rising and falling with tiny breaths, dreams bundling quietly beneath wool and straw. You walk onward, ready to explore how ancient medical beliefs shaped winter nights in ways as mysterious as the snow-filled sky above you. You continue down the narrow path, the snow now packed so tightly beneath your boots that it crunches like brittle paper. The cold settles deeper into the night, as though the darkness itself grows heavier with frost. You pull your coat closer and turn toward a small cottage with a faint herbal scent drifting from its chimney. The fragrance is sharp and soothing at once, carrying hints of sage, mint, and something slightly bitter you cannot identify. As you draw closer, you realize you have reached the home of someone who tends to the village's ailments in winter, a healer. A person whose understanding of warmth comes not from fire or bedding, but from the mysteries of the human body. When you knock softly, an elderly woman opens the door. Her eyes are bright despite her age, and she wears a layered shawl that looks older than the cottage itself. She waves you inside with a calm gesture. The air inside is cool but not unwelcoming. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the rafters. Clay jars line wooden shelves. A low table stands near the hearth, cluttered with pestles, dried roots, and folded cloths. She studies you for a moment, then smiles knowingly, as though she already understands why you have come. She motions toward a small stool near the fire. You sit, feeling the cold ease from your fingers as the warmth reaches you in slow waves. The healer begins speaking in a gentle voice. She tells you that winter affects the body in ways most people do not see. Sleep becomes harder, breathing grows sharp, blood thickens with cold. She pulls a small clay pot from a shelf and sets it before you. Inside lies a mixture of crushed herbs and something that looks like coiled bark. She lifts a pinch to your nose. The scent burns slightly, clearing your sinuses in a single breath. She explains that medieval healers believed winter cold imbalanced the body's inner forces, making people sluggish, melancholic, or restless at night. To counter these effects, they relied on warming herbs, stimulating drinks, or practices meant to restore equilibrium. Some ideas came from experience. Others came from what she calls the old books, worn manuscripts passed down from healer to healer. She walks to her table, picks up a small cloth pouch, and hands it to you. When you open it, you find dark brown pieces of dried ginger. She says ginger warms the stomach and makes sleep deeper, especially after days spent in freezing fields. She points to a pot simmering on the hearth. A warm ginger drink rests inside. She pours a cup and hands it to you. The heat spreads inside your chest like a slow burning coal. A boy enters the cottage, shivering and red-faced. The healer guides him to sit near the fire. His mother follows, explaining that he has been coughing through the night. The healer listens carefully, places her palm near his forehead, and nods. She gathers a small bundle of thyme and mint from the rafters, crushes them between her hands, and drops them into a steaming bowl of water. Steam rises in fragrant clouds. She instructs the boy to breathe in slowly. As he leans forward, his shoulders relax, and his breath steadies. You can almost see the warmth seeping into his lungs. His mother watches anxiously, then relaxes when his cough softens to a faint rattle. The healer turns back to you and says that warm air and steady breath are essential to surviving winter nights. She tells you something often mentioned in medieval medical writings. Cold air was believed to weaken the spirit and cloud the mind. A person who inhaled too much cold could fall into troubled sleep, filled with unsettling dreams. Warming herbs and thick drinks served not just physical needs but spiritual ones. She moves to a shelf and pulls down a small book made of thin, brittle parchment. She flips through pages filled with faint ink drawings, plants, stars, diagrams of bodies. She tells you that healers across different regions had their own theories about warmth and balance. Some believed warmth came from the heart, others believed it rose from the stomach. She taps one page and explains a thought that scholars often discuss. Different households interpreted these theories in many ways. Some used herbs to warm their breath, others applied heated cloths to the stomach, others changed their diet when frost grew sharp. She closes the book and brings out a clay bowl containing a strange mixture of crushed berries and honey. She dips her finger into it and places a tiny dab on your tongue. The taste is both sweet and medicinal. She says this blend is for calming the mind during winter insomnia. A soft mind helps the body withstand the cold. She tells you some families add warm milk to this mixture to create a thick, soothing drink before bed. As she speaks, you notice a clay vessel resting beside the hearth. It is filled with hot sand. The healer presses her hands into the sand slowly. She explains that heated sand retains warmth longer than stones or water in winter. When wrapped in cloth and placed near the feet, it can help children fall asleep faster. She shows you several cloth bundles prepared for families to pick up tomorrow morning. Each bundle smells faintly of sage. She pauses and shares a fragment of winter lore passed to her by her mother. It is said that a warm stomach invites peaceful dreams, while a cold stomach invites dreams that wander. The idea is not scientific, but it feels rooted in something real, the body seeking comfort in the quiet hours of the night. The boy who came earlier yawns, no longer coughing. His mother thanks the healer with deep relief before wrapping him in a thick cloak and leaving quietly. The healer watches them go, her face gentle. She turns back to you and says that winter turns healers into guardians of both body and spirit. She laughs softly, saying she often sleeps very little during the coldest nights because someone always needs a warm drink or a cloth soaked in herbs. She sits beside you and adds a detail healers often debate among themselves even today. Some argue that medieval winter remedies came mostly from simple observation and instinct. Others believe they were influenced heavily by classical medical theory about balancing bodily humours. She shrugs and says that whatever the truth is, what matters is that people survived, families grew, and winter passed each year. She hands you one more item before you leave, a tiny cloth pouch filled with rosemary and dried apple peel. She tells you to hold it to your chest before sleeping. She says the scent remembers summer even in the heart of winter. You smile, pocket the pouch, and stand slowly. When you step outside, the healer closes the door gently. The cold sweeps around you again, but now the air carries a faint promise of warmth from the herbs inside your coat. You breathe deeply, letting the scents mingle with the night air. You turn toward the next path, ready to discover how the long winter darkness shapes dreams and fears in the quiet medieval mind. You leave the healer's cottage with the small rosemary pouch warming your palm, its scent clinging to your fingers like a soft memory of summer. The cold greets you instantly, brushing your cheeks with a sharp sting. You exhale slowly and watch the vapor drift like thin, ghostly ribbons. The village is nearly silent now. Chimneys no longer send up steady plumes. Fires have been banked, windows dim. Only the moon and the icy air keep you company as you follow a narrow path that curves behind several cottages. You walk until the houses thin out, revealing a small meadow beyond the last row of fences. Snow blankets everything, transforming the world into a pale, silent sea. The distant tree line forms a jagged silhouette beneath the sky. As you stand in the open, a strange feeling settles over you, a sense of watching, of waiting, the kind of stillness that invites thoughts you would ignore during daylight. Winter nights heighten the imagination. In a world without lanterns or streetlights, the darkness itself becomes a character. You follow the path back toward the cottages and approach one with a faint glow pulsing like a heartbeat inside. When you enter, you expect warmth, but the air has grown cold. The fire has completely died. Only a weak ember glows like a tired eye beneath the ash. A family lies sleeping under thick blankets, their breaths rising in small clouds. But one person is awake. A teenage girl sits near the bed, wrapped in a shawl, staring at the shuttered window with wide, unblinking eyes. She nearly startles when you step quietly inside, then relaxes and gestures for you to join her. She whispers that she cannot sleep, not because of the cold, but because winter nights always bring strange dreams. She hugs her knees closer and whispers again that dreams feel different in winter, heavier, slower, more vivid, as if frost touches the mind the same way it touches the earth. You sit beside her and listen. She tells you she dreamed earlier of walking through the snow and hearing footsteps behind her, though no one was there. She dreamed of distant voices calling her name through a thick mist. Dreams like these frighten her, yet she has them every winter. She says her grandmother used to call them winter wanderings of the mind. The girl leans closer and says quietly that in this village, people believe winter dreams come from the darkness slipping through the cracks at night. When the fire dies, and the cold grows too bold, dreams walk through the room like visitors. She points toward the shutter. Frost curls across the edges, forming delicate branching patterns. She says the people here believe that frost carries quiet stories with it, shaping what the mind sees while asleep. Her mother suddenly stirs in her sleep and mutters something. The girl watches her carefully, explaining that sleep-talking becomes more common when nights grow brutally cold. You can tell from her expression that she takes these moments seriously. The father lies on the far side of the bed. His brow furrows as if he is trapped in a deep dream. The girl says he dreams of wolves every winter. Not frightening wolves, but silent ones, standing in the snow and staring at him as though trying to deliver a message. She says he never dreams of wolves in summer, only when frost covers the fields. She turns back to you with earnest intensity and tells you an idea often murmured among older villagers. Long winter nights were thought to open a thin space between the waking world and the world of dreams. Not a dangerous space, but a permeable one. A place where old memories, fears, and hopes drifted freely. Modern minds might call it imagination, but medieval minds called it winter vision. The girl gets up and urges you to follow her. She tiptoes to the opposite corner of the room and lifts a small wooden box from a shelf. Inside are tiny objects: pebbles, dried herbs, feathers, 2 shells, and a tiny carved wooden figure of a bird. She says these items help her sleep through winter when dreams grow too vivid. She places each object before you. The pebbles, she says, are for grounding the mind, the herbs for calming the breath, the shells for listening to the quiet inside herself, the feathers for lifting fear from her heart. Whether these beliefs are symbolic or practical, you sense they serve the same purpose as a warm blanket or soothing drink. They guide the mind through the icy hours. She takes the wooden bird and explains that her great-grandmother carved it for her. It is meant to guard her dreams, though not by chasing bad visions away. Instead, it lures gentle dreams into the room, encouraging thoughts of springtime fields and warm breezes. She presses the bird to her chest and inhales deeply, then sets it carefully beside her pillow. You notice a piece of parchment tucked inside the wooden box. She unfolds it with pride. It contains faint handwriting describing winter dream interpretations. She points to a line about wandering through snow in dreams, saying it symbolizes feeling unprepared for the future. Another line speaks of hearing voices in winter dreams, meaning the mind is seeking company in long loneliness. You recognize these interpretations as combinations of tradition, imagination, and genuine emotional insight. As she reads, she mentions a topic that fascinates those who study medieval folklore. Many rural communities believe dreams became sharper in winter not because of spirits, but because people slept longer in the darkness, giving their minds more time to wander. She says her grandmother believed dreams were simply what the mind did when it grew tired of cold and silence. You find the idea strangely poetic. A faint noise outside interrupts her thoughts. A branch snaps beneath the weight of gathering frost. She freezes, staring at the shutter as if expecting another sound. Then she laughs softly at herself, embarrassed. The winter has made her jumpy. She returns to the bed, lifts a thick wool blanket, and invites you to feel how cold it has become since the fire died. You slip your hand beneath it. The air inside feels heavy and chilly. She whispers that it is during this cold moment, just before dawn, that dreams turn darkest. She says her grandmother called this the hour when winter tests the spirit. She curls beneath the blanket and whispers a few calming words her grandmother taught her. They are simple phrases meant to settle the mind, not spells or charms. She says the words help keep her dreams steady. She pats the space beside her pillow, where the wooden bird rests. You sit beside the bed for a few minutes while the room fills with the soft creaking of timbers adjusting to the cold. The girl's eyes droop. She yawns. Her breaths gradually lengthen, becoming slow and even. Winter-herbed air fills your lungs. You sense her mind drifting into dreams once more, hopefully gentler this time. Before you leave, you glance one last time at the frost patterns on the shutter. They shimmer faintly in the moonlight, branch-like, vein-like. They look almost alive. You understand why medieval people imagined frost carrying stories. You step outside, and the cold clamps onto you immediately. The sky glows faintly with pre-dawn light. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing in the silence and preparing to listen next to the winter's hidden sounds that cradle the village until morning. You remain still for a moment in the faint pre-dawn glow, letting the cold trace a line down your spine. The village around you seems half asleep, half listening. Winter has a soundscape of its own. Thin, brittle, echoing. You take a slow breath and walk along the narrow lane again, this time guided not by light or warmth, but by the strange noises that drift through frozen air when the world is quiet enough to hear them. As you approach the next cottage, you pause. The night is no longer silent. You hear it now. A creak, a groan, a crackle, like something slowly tearing. You step closer to a wooden fence, and the sound sharpens. It is the fence itself complaining as frost tightens the wood, shrinking it, reshaping it, forcing it to speak in long, tired moans. You touch the surface. It feels rigid, as if every drop of moisture in the plank has turned to glass. You continue walking, listening more carefully. Winter reveals details you usually miss. Your boots crunch with a rhythm that almost echoes. The snow is so cold it seems crystalline, shattering underfoot rather than compressing. Each step seems louder in the thin air, almost metallic. You tilt your head and wait. Another sound. A soft tapping from a nearby roof. Icicles breaking free and falling one by one, striking the ground with tiny crystalline clinks. A door opens quietly in the cottage ahead. An old man steps out, wrapped in a cloak, holding a small stick to test the snow. He notices you and waves you closer. His breath puffs out like a plume of smoke. He says he likes to listen to the village before dawn. Sounds tell him things that sight cannot. You follow him as he gestures toward the side of his house. He points to the wooden beams supporting the roof. They creak steadily, expanding and contracting with the cold. He places your hand against the wood. You can feel faint vibrations, as though the house is alive, adjusting itself carefully to survive the night. He explains that villagers recognize the difference between normal winter creaks and the dangerous kind. The dangerous ones sound almost like a cough, sharp and sudden, signaling that ice has slipped between two boards or a beam has cracked. His father taught him to wake instantly if he hears that sound on a fierce night. He laughs softly and says children claim the beams speak with personalities. One child insists the left beam complains more loudly than the right. Another says the roof groans only when it is lonely. These stories bring warmth to long nights. He leads you behind the cottage where the path narrows. You hear another sound now, a rhythmic scraping noise. It takes you a moment to recognize it. A few huddled goats inside a shed shift in their sleep, dragging their hooves through straw. The straw rustles, creating a steady whisper. The goat's warm breath fogs the slats in the wall. The old man explains that villagers often listen for this sound to know their animals are safe. If the goats fall silent for too long, someone wakes to check on them. A gust of wind sweeps through suddenly. It carries a lonely whistle as it snakes between the cottages. The sound rises and falls like a sad flute. The old man closes his eyes to listen. He says winter winds always arrive with stories. Some bring warnings of storms. Others bring balmy weather behind them. He claims he can tell the difference by the pitch of the whistle, though he admits he may simply be imagining patterns after so many winters. You walk with him back toward the main lane. A crow caws somewhere overhead, its call sharp and hollow. It echoes strangely in the cold, as though bouncing off invisible walls. The man tells you animals behave differently in winter nights. Crows call less often, owls grow quieter, dogs bark at things they barely see, and horses stamp their feet just to feel blood warming in their legs. He invites you inside his cottage where his wife sits near a dim hearth. She holds her hands over the weak light, listening intently. She tells you she has always heard more in the winter darkness than in summer nights. She claims winter amplifies sound. It strips away background noise until even the faintest whisper becomes clear. As she speaks, you notice a sound outside, a distant crack, deep and resonant. The couple both pause. You stare toward the window as the old man listens carefully. Then he relaxes. He says it is only the river freezing more deeply. Thickening ice expands and splits, creating echoes that travel across the village like muted thunder. You imagine the dark river winding beyond the cottages, slowly turning solid, calling out through the night. The woman smiles and tells you another sound to listen for. Frost cracking on the thatched roofs at dawn. She says it always begins very faintly, a soft pinprick noise here and there, before turning into a chorus of tiny cracks as sunlight begins to brush the edges of the roofs. She calls it the morning applause of winter. You imagine waking to that sound, not knowing whether to feel comforted or unsettled. She asks you to step near the window. You do. The frost patterns shiver slightly when a small vibration passes through the wall. She explains that frost itself can make noise. When temperatures drop sharply, frost crystals expand suddenly, creating faint popping sounds that blend into the air like tiny sighs. Her husband sits on a bench and points at the low shelf behind the hearth. A wooden bowl sits there, filled with dried beans. He says that on certain winter nights, the beans pop slightly, not from heat but from the dry air pulling at their shells. He jokes that this sound once startled a visiting cousin who thought spirits had entered the cottage. You laugh softly with them. Then something else reaches your ears, a faint scratching sound coming from above. You glance upward. The man explains that it is likely a dormouse or a winter bird fluttering in the rafters. In winter, all creatures search for warmth. Even mice and birds move closer to human homes. The sound is gentle, barely noticeable unless the house is silent. Tonight, it sounds like a tiny heartbeat above you. The couple shares one more detail often discussed in winter stories. Some villagers believe certain night sounds carry messages. The crack of a distant tree branch might foretell a storm. The sudden silence of animals might hint at approaching danger. The hum of wind beneath a door might signal a change in weather by morning. These beliefs weave together practical awareness and imagination, helping people feel connected to the night rather than threatened by it. As the first pale light of dawn touches the edges of the frost-covered shutters, you step outside. The air has grown even colder, as if dawn squeezes the last breath of warmth from the world before giving it back. A thin, crackling noise rises from roofs all around you. The woman was right. The frost is waking with the sun, breaking gently like tiny shards of glass. You close your eyes and listen. Wind, frost, wood, animals, water beneath ice, the breathing of sleeping households. Winter nights speak, and now you understand their language a little better. You exhale slowly, letting the soundscape fade. Then you begin walking again, sensing that the next cottage will show you what happens when the night becomes too cold, even for all the rituals and tricks you have seen so far. You leave the old couple's cottage behind and step into the thinning night. Dawn is close, yet the cold deepens as if winter wishes to make one final point. Your breath turns into heavy mist. The sky grows a shade lighter, but the air grows sharper. You follow a narrow lane that dips between two cottages and leads toward the lowest part of the village. Here, the cold settles with particular cruelty. Frost clings to the ground in thick layers, and even your footsteps echo more sharply, as if the frozen earth itself has become brittle. You soon notice a cottage with no smoke rising from its chimney. Its shutters are tightly closed, and a thin crust of frost clings to the frame of the door. Something inside feels still, too still. You step closer, lift the latch gently, and slip inside. The cottage is dark except for the faintest grey light slipping under the door. The air is icy, so cold that you can see the condensation of each breath drifting slowly to the floor. The fire in the hearth has died completely. No embers glow beneath the ashes. The family inside lies awake, bundled in blankets so thick and layered that they look like mounds of fabric rather than people. Their faces peek out with red noses and trembling chins. The mother whispers a greeting, her voice weak from shivering. She explains that the windstorm last night killed their fire before they could bank it. Too much smoke blew back through the chimney, forcing them to let the flames die. They planned to relight it at dawn, but the cold overwhelmed them. You can see the effort it takes for her to speak. Every word escapes as a cloud. Her husband lifts his head, teeth chattering as he tries to smile. He tells you that when fire fails, families must turn to whatever they have left. They gathered every blanket they own. They covered the shutters with spare wool. They stuffed straw into the gaps near the door. They kept their children pressed close against them through the night. You kneel beside the bundled family. Their body heat radiates faintly, but the air steals it quickly. The youngest child peeks from under a blanket, cheeks pale and lips tinted blue. He holds a small wool glove in his hand, clutching it like a talisman. His sister rests behind him, rubbing her hands together beneath the covers to keep her fingers from stiffening. The mother shifts slightly and reveals a clay jar wrapped tightly in cloth. She pulls back the layer and shows you warm coals inside. They glow faintly, no brighter than fireflies. You raise your eyebrows, surprised that they still emit warmth. She explains that her husband kept a few embers alive in the jar, protecting them with a metal lid and layers of cloth. It is not enough to heat the room, but enough to help them relight the fire once their bodies can bear the cold. This small ember jar feels like the last defense against a night that nearly claimed their strength. The father admits he almost dropped it when his hands grew numb. He laughs weakly, saying he has never felt so terrified of losing a single handful of coals. The mother pulls the blankets closer and shares a detail many villagers whisper about during harsh winters. When fire fails, the cold becomes something alive, not metaphorically, but in their perception, a force that prowls the house, seeking weak places. She says the cold moves across the floor like an invisible fog, creeping beneath blankets and settling on the chest. It sits there, heavy and patient, testing the body's resolve. You feel a wave of stillness wash over the room. Even the creaking of the walls has softened under the weight of frost. The father says that nights like this make people reconsider every habit. Why they place the bed where they do, why they gather herbs, why they store warm stones next to the hearth. One error, one forgotten ember, one broken shutter, and the cold takes control. He moves his hand toward a small wooden stool near the bed. On it lies a flat stone wrapped in cloth. He unwraps it slowly and touches it with his fingers. The stone is cold now, but earlier in the night it held enough warmth to comfort their little boy. They heated it by the fire before the storm shut the chimney. He places it back onto the stool with a sigh. The mother confesses something quietly. She says that when the fire dies completely, fear grows faster than frost. Fear that the night will not end. Fear that the children will not wake warm enough to move. Fear that frost will form on their blankets or that their breaths will turn shallow. These moments make dawn feel impossibly far away. You glance toward the shuttered window. Frost spreads across the wood, forming thick white lines that look almost like veins. The cold hums softly behind it. The father points to a dark patch near the bottom of the wall where cold air seeps inside. He stuffed the gap with straw hours ago, but the wind forced it loose again. He says he will repair it once the light grows stronger. His voice cracks as he speaks. You see how exhausted he is. The older child speaks softly from beneath the blankets. She says she kept their puppy tucked under the covers all night to stay warm, but the puppy wriggled free and hid beneath the table. You look there and see a tiny shape curled in a tight ball, shivering gently. You scoop it up and return it to the girl, who wraps it under the blanket and holds it close. The mother nods gratefully. She explains that animals often panic when fire disappears. They can sense the change in the air. The puppy must have felt the temperature drop too quickly to remain still. She reaches for a small wooden box beside her bed. Inside are dried herbs. She crushes a few between her fingers and brings them to her nose, breathing deeply. She says the herbs do not warm the body, but they calm the mind, helping her focus enough to keep the children reassured. Focus becomes important when numbness spreads too quickly through limbs. The father suddenly remarks on something that scholars who analyze village life sometimes debate. Did most families have backup embers for nights like this? Some believe people always kept a jar of coals ready. Others say only certain households maintained such habits, leaving many vulnerable during storms. He shrugs weakly, saying all he knows is that his father taught him to save coals after losing too many fires in early winters. You help him move the ember jar closer to the hearth. The family watches with hopeful eyes. The mother hands you a bundle of dried twigs. The father gestures weakly for you to try relighting the fire. You lean toward the hearth, open the ember jar carefully, and place a single glowing coal into the center of a small nest of kindling. You blow gently. The ember brightens. A spark, then another. The twigs begin to glow at their tips. A small flame rises, trembling like a newborn creature, uncertain of its strength. The children gasp quietly. The flame strengthens. You add another twig, then another. Soon, a tiny fire flickers in the hearth, pushing back the cold one breath at a time. Warm light spills across the family's faces. Their shoulders loosen. Their eyes widen with relief. The puppy wriggles beneath the blanket. You add a thicker stick, and the flame grows brighter, stronger. The father bows his head and exhales, as if releasing a weight he has carried for hours. The mother whispers a quiet thank you. The older child rests her head against her brother's shoulder. The fire crackles, and warmth gathers slowly in the room like fog dissolving. You stay until you feel the temperature lift, until the frost on the shutters begins to melt into tiny droplets. Then you stand, nod to the family, and step outside into the dawn. The cold has softened. Warmth follows you now, not from a fire, but from the memory of a flame reborn in the darkest hour. You walk on toward the rising sun, ready to witness what morning looks like in a world that has survived the coldest part of the night. You step away from the cottage where the fire has just been reborn, and the first pale hints of dawn stretch across the horizon like thin strokes of faded gold. The sky no longer feels like a solid sheet of iron. Instead, it softens at the edges, brushing light against the frozen fields. The air is still cold enough to sting, but something inside it has changed. You inhale and taste a gentler breeze. The night has passed. And surviving the night in medieval winter always carried a quiet sense of triumph, even if no one spoke of it aloud. You walk slowly through the village as morning begins to stir. Frost cracks softly beneath your boots, but the harsh bite of darkness has faded. Smoke rises from a few chimneys as fires are coaxed back to life. You hear muffled voices inside cottages, the rustle of blankets being folded, the clatter of spoons against wooden bowls. Winter routines resume, steady and familiar. You stop beside a cottage where a woman steps outside, rubbing her arms briskly. Her breath fogs the air as she yawns. She tells you that every dawn after a brutal night feels like opening a book you feared might never be read again. She laughs softly and disappears back inside to wake her children. You continue walking until you reach a narrow footpath leading to a small pasture. There, a handful of cows stand clustered near the fence, their breaths rising in slow puffs. A stable boy approaches with a bucket in each hand, his steps heavy from exhaustion. He tells you he spent half the night keeping watch over a newborn calf. It survived the cold, he says, but only because he kept it pressed against the warmth of its mother's flank. He beams with pride. Animals, like people, greet dawn as survivors. You move on and reach a cottage with a shutter slightly ajar. Inside, an elderly couple sits near a newly lit fire. They wrap their hands around warm cups, their fingers trembling with age and morning chill. You watch the steam rise from their drinks. They lean close together as if sharing the same small pocket of heat. The old man glances at you and nods with the satisfaction of someone who has seen many winters and knows the quiet power of dawn. Across the lane, a child opens a door and steps outside, dragging a wool blanket behind him like a cape. His cheeks are pink from sleep, and he squints at the cold morning light. His mother calls him back inside before the frost bites him. As he turns, he waves at you shyly. His tiny gesture carries the uncomplicated joy of waking warm and safe to another day. You walk farther and notice villagers emerging in ones and twos, all moving slowly. They stand in their doorways for a moment, breathing in the morning. Some stretch stiff arms, some rub their shoulders. Some simply lean on the doorframe, grateful the night is behind them. Their bodies are tired. Their eyes still carry shadows from cold dreams and restless hours. But the sun, weak as it is, touches each face with a promise of warmth to come. A blacksmith trudges past you toward his forge, wrapped in layers of wool and leather. He says he lights his fire early on winter mornings so neighbors can warm their hands if their fires fail. He gestures toward the forge door and says that in deep winters, the shared heat from his work becomes as important as the tools he makes. You sense quiet pride beneath his words. You continue toward the village edge, where the land slopes gently downward. From here, you can see the full stretch of fields covered in frost. The rising sun glints across the frozen surface, turning everything silver. The view is breathtaking in its stillness. A world sculpted overnight by cold hands, now slowly waking. In the distance, you see a monk walking along the road, wrapped tightly in his robe. His sandals crunch the frost as he heads toward the monastery after morning prayer. His face is calm, serene despite the cold. His stillness reminds you of the dormitory you visited and the discipline that shaped his night. Even in hardship, he moves with quiet purpose. As you head back toward the village center, you notice a group of travelers preparing their horses outside the inn. They stamp their feet, clap their hands, and laugh weakly as they adjust their cloaks. One man lifts a small clay firepot from the snow. It still holds a tiny warmth inside. He grins and says the pot kept him alive last night. The others nod knowingly. Then they mount their horses, ready to continue their journey. In the middle of the lane, a farmer clears snow from his doorstep. He pauses long enough to greet you. He says the hardest part of winter mornings is convincing his body to move again after lying stiff beneath the blankets. He chuckles as he flexes his fingers. Movement hurts at first, he says, but it stirs life back into the limbs. His smile is worn but content. You notice the frost beginning to melt on the shutters. Thin droplets run in tiny trails, glistening in the light. The sound of water slowly dripping adds a gentle rhythm to the morning. It is like a sigh of release from the world itself. You pass by a cottage where the fire inside crackles loudly. A woman lifts a pan of porridge and stirs it with determination. Her children sit cross-legged on the floor, rubbing their arms to chase off the last shivers. The smell of warm oats drifts through the open doorway. You hear the mother humming to herself. The tune is soft, steady, and comforting. As you walk on, you feel the subtle shift in your own body. The cold still nips at your skin, but the fear of the night's deepest chill is gone. The world feels safer now that the sun has begun its slow climb. You move toward the last rise, overlooking the village. From here, you see smoke rising from every chimney, little banners of victory against the night. You stand at the crest of the slope and watch the village breathe. Frost glitters on every roof, light spills from every window. And for a moment, you imagine how many thousands of winter mornings looked exactly like this across medieval England. Dawn arriving like a soft blessing, fire returning to hearths, families waking with relief. You close your eyes and let the cold breeze brush past you one last time. Then you take a long breath, ready to leave the night behind. You stand at the edge of the village as the morning light spreads slowly across the frozen fields. The cold remains, but it feels softer now, its sharpness dulled by the calm certainty of dawn. You breathe deeply, letting the air move in and out, steady and smooth. As your breath flows, you feel the tension you gathered during the long winter night begin to melt away. Little by little, the quiet of morning settles into your chest like warm ash in a hearth. You picture the village behind you. Every cottage now carries a small flame again, flickering gently in its hearth. Families tuck into warm breakfasts. Children stretch sleepy limbs. Travelers pack their bundles with calmer hearts. Animals huddle in sheltered corners, steam rising from their breaths. All of it happening slowly, softly, as if the world itself is waking on tiptoe. Let your own thoughts soften with this morning. Let them drift like the thin threads of smoke rising into the pale sky. Feel your shoulders loosen. Let your jaw relax. Let the chill fade from your hands. Imagine pulling a comforting blanket toward your chin as the last embers of the long night settle into a gentle glow. Winter will always test the edges of human strength, yet dawn always comes. Let that rhythm soothe you now. Cold, then warmth. Darkness, then light. Struggle, then rest. You survived the deepest part of the night, and now all that remains is calm. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts quiet. Let your body settle as though sinking into a warm bed after a cold journey. Sleep softly now. The night is over. Morning has you in its gentle hands.